Chapter 508. Han Sanhe had gone back to rest for more than 2 hours. Zhang Gu was still at the top of the mountain, deep in thought. Determination to die. Determination to die. Zhang Ji's gaze grew brighter and more resolute. Fu Baogua asked, "Has old Marshal's carriage left?" "It's been 4 hours since it left the base." "Good. Has young Master Yun left?" "I didn't see him." "He should have left with old Marshal." "Good. That's great." Fu Baogua heaved a long sigh of relief. "This Marshal can then be free of worries and fight to the death with all my might." Yun Yang took advantage of the dark night and sprinted like a wisp of smoke towards Tianxian Cliff at full speed. The Temple of the Nine Supremes stood at the highest point of Tianxian Cliff. It was the destination of Yun Yang's trip. "I'm sorry, brothers. I have to take this step after all. I can't afford to hesitate when it's a matter of life and death." Yun Yang stood alone before the Temple of the Nine Supremes in the dark of the night. The long-awaited Temple of the Nine Supremes was right before his eyes. The majestic Yutong, the mighty Nine Supremes. Just the 8 words at the door made Yun Yang stop and stare at them for a long time. It was precisely these 8 words that had created countless massacres and blood debts. After a moment's pause, he slowly stepped into the place he had not visited for a long time. Standing alone in the middle of the hall, Yun Yang was at a loss as he stared at the 9 Supremes' silent statues. At this moment it was as if he had become one of the 9 statues and no longer belonged to this world. "If there's no other choice, I really don't want to use your powers," Yun Yang murmured. "This younger brother has really gone to the end of the line. No matter how reluctant I am, no matter how indignant I am, everything that is happening right now is not what my brothers would like to see. If Yutong were to fall just like this young brother would be too ashamed to meet my brothers in the afterlife." So, other than Yun Yang, there was probably no one else in this world who did not know that Tianxian Cliff was hiding a huge secret about the 9 Supremes. During the battle at Tianxian Cliff, the spiritual restraining formation had sealed all of the 9 Supremes' energy within their physical bodies, rendering them unable to use any of it. It was also after that battle that the 9 Supremes had fallen. It could be said to be Yutong's greatest regret in the last 100 years. The 9 Supremes were annihilated. However, it was also because of the spiritual restraining formation that the 9 Supremes' power did not dissipate even in death, being sealed within the boundaries of Tianxian Cliff. Other than the residents of 9 Supremes, the force belonged to heaven and earth. Even though the original owner had died, the force was sealed here and had not weakened at all. Even if a man dies, his strength lives on. That was because the power of these 9 attributes originally belonged to the vast sky and the earth. It was only because of a special method like the spirit controlling array that it was temporarily sealed. However, it was also because of this that this secret had been hidden in this place for a long time. If no one came to draw it, then perhaps after a very long time, this energy would gradually dissipate bit by bit, gradually vanish, and once again transform into the spiritual energy of the world. To be able to draw upon the 9 Supreme spiritual power, one must possess the same cultivation method. Other than that, even if the person's cultivation base was astounding, there was nothing that could be done. In spite of this, perhaps heaven and earth were fated to be mysterious, and mysterious, one of the 9 Supremes had survived. Supreme Cloud. Supreme Cloud, one of the 9 Supremes, had come and personally activated this force. As long as he was willing, he could draw upon it effortlessly. Yun Yang had known about the existence of this force since a long time ago. Since the day he returned to the residence of 9 Supremes for the first time, he had sensed another place where the 9 Supreme spiritual power gathered in this world. As long as Yun Yang arrived there, he could use the massive amount of spiritual power to elevate himself tremendously. However, Yun Yang had never drawn upon the power of this place. He did not even have the thought of doing so. He had been preserving this spiritual power. Even the last time, he would rather destroy his own body to cultivate the power of wind and fire with all his might than use this force. There was no other reason other than this was the last bit of power his brothers had left in this world. It was also an irrefutable proof that his brothers were still alive. If this force were to be used, there might really be nothing left. There would be no more traces of the other 9 Supremes in this world. By then, today, however, Yunyang felt that he had been forced into a dead end. If he did not use this force, Yutong would definitely lose. The entire country would be under Dongshuan's iron hooves. The people would be plunged into misery, the nation would be annihilated. The land of Yutong was the land that he and his brothers had protected for their entire lives. How could they watch it be destroyed like this? Yunyang knelt down silently and knocked his head hard on the ground. When he stood up, his forehead was covered in blood. "Brothers, Xiaojiu is useless, please forgive me." It was midnight. When Dongxian had yet to make a move, Yutong had actually made the first move, taking the initiative to attack. Yutong's warriors were dressed neatly. It was not that the soldiers did not want to clean themselves, but it was because there were rarely any soldiers who did not have blood stains on them throughout the battle. Their armor and clothing were still intact, but even if there were blood stains on them, even if their clothes were tattered, they still tried their best to tidy themselves up. The torn areas were mended as best as they could, their belts were tied tightly and their pants were tied neatly. They looked indescribably neat and tidy. They set off in neat rows, their armors bright and clean. Even their helmets were immaculately polished. Their faces were also the part that was uniformly clean. Everyone's faces were washed and many of the soldiers had even washed their hair. It was as if what they were about to face was not a battle to the death, but an important person. Troops after troops came out from the mountains, the forest, and the campsite, lining up on the plains in front of the mountain. Yutong's soldiers marched and lined up, singing in unison. Looking afar, Yutong's soldiers did not look like a troop that was going to participate in the final battle. Instead, they looked like a ceremonial troop that had come to attend a banquet. The commanders of each troop stood at the front of the formation with their chests puffed up high. All the constructions that Fu Baogua had built during this period of time had long been destroyed, there was nothing left to defend. What was left of Yutong now was only flesh and blood. There was only life left. Then, let us use our lives and blood to build another fortress of resilience that belongs only to Yutong. The trombones sounded passionately. The uniform clopping of hooves could be heard with a rhythm that sent chills down one's spine. Troop after troop of steel cavalry appeared, slowly approaching the left side of the battlefield from the left. Troop after troop of serving troop appeared, approaching the right side of the battlefield from the right. The atmosphere was unusually solemn, the entire battlefield was solemn. My friend has helped me contact Peking Union Medical College Hospital. Line up tomorrow, be hospitalized the day after, and undergo surgery on Monday or Tuesday. Chapter 509. Other than the people, there were also the cavalry's warhorses that came out in formation. For some reason, the warhorses that were usually cheerful seemed to feel the solemn atmosphere today. Even when they were in the midst of such a loud commotion, the warhorses were unusually tame. Amidst the low but passionate singing, all of Yutong's troops, be it infantry or cavalry, went into a conical formation. It was a triangular conical formation. The only purpose of such a formation was to attack, it was a formation that could not defend and only attack. It was a formation that would only be used when facing an enemy that was a few times larger than one's own. At the same time, it was the most extreme and most decisive formation. Among the steel horsemen, 12 youngsters were exceptionally eye-catching. They were also lined up neatly in a row. There was not the slightest bit of hesitation or confusion on their young faces, only determination. These youths were the children from the small valley where Yunyang had been recuperating the other day. All of them were there, not a single one missing. Shengguan Lingxiu, Qiu Jianhan, and Fu Baogua had solemnly told them to take good care of them and protect them as much as possible. In fact, they were included in the troop that was retreating this time, but when they left, even the Steel Cavalry's leader had asked them to retreat, repeatedly stating that they were Yutong's future hope. It was not cowardice to retreat now, nor was it cowardice, however, no matter how much they tried to persuade them, the 12 youths refused to leave. Since we're men, we should fight for the country. This is a time of crisis for the country. If we valued our lives, we wouldn't have come. We're here to kill the enemy and serve the country, not to be taken care of. If you must chase us away, we'll form our own team and charge the formation ourselves. We won't leave. We've decided to stay here and die here. The 12 youths spoke in unison, their words sonorous and sonorous. Finally, it was Wang Dinghua who made the final decision. They're all good men. Let them stay. Good men and good children. Although there was only a difference of one word, the meaning was as different as heaven and earth. All the men in the military understood the meaning of these words. Towards these few youths, they instantly became more friendly. Previously, they had taken care of and cared for these youths, and even felt a little jealous. A group of half-grown children, what did they know about fighting on the battlefield? Didn't they know that it was a matter of life and death? They had wasted so many good horses, and they even needed someone to take care of them. Leaving was the right thing to do. But now, there was only the camaraderie of fellow soldiers, enough to entrust his back to the greatest trust. Now, with the 12 youths accompanying the team to battle, just from their appearance alone, they were already qualified to be Iron Cavalry. There was not the slightest difference between them and their comrades. They were also prepared to die, ready to fight to the death. They were qualified Yutong soldiers as well, not letting down Yutong's military might. Fu Baogua had changed into a rare set of golden armor and appeared at the center of the army. Perhaps it was heaven's will that the heavens were happy to see Yutong's successful battle, as the snow that had been falling for days finally stopped. Under the sunlight that had not shone for a long time, Fu Baogua's golden helmet and armor shimmered like a deity, his aura unparalleled. War drums. Fu Baogua waved his hand and ordered calmly. Dong. The dull sound of a drum suddenly rang out, spreading far and wide. Then, dong. Dong. Dong, another 3 drum beats rang out. Dong, 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 dong. It was only then that the continuous beating of the war drums rang out continuously. The drum beats were like a dull pounding on one's heart, causing the blood in one's chest to heat up and surge along with the drum beats until it boiled. As the drum beats grew louder and louder, each of Yutong's soldiers' faces seemed to glow. They were still motionless, but their hands that were gripping their weapons tightened gradually, their grip on the weapons becoming steadier. Although all the warhorses were unusually quiet and motionless, each of them had their ears perked up, their muscles tensed up. They did not even make the subconscious movement of wagging their tails. The only movement they made was to keep their eyes forward, waiting for their master's order before they turned into an arrow that had left the bow and headed for the final battlefield. On the opposite side, the shadow cavalry surged forward slowly like a tidal wave. Dongxuan's soldiers' sabers and spears shone brightly, their murderous aura soaring to the sky. Obviously, Zhang Gu had also adopted the most extreme and forceful method to face the enemy head-on. If you want to court death, I shall fulfill your wish. I shall use my strongest combat power, my comprehensive combat power that far surpasses yours, to crush your final counterattack. This is also the greatest respect I can give to my opponent. Perhaps, this was the greatest respect that could ever be given in this world. Dong, 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 drumbeats rang out from Dongxuan's side as well. Almost at the same time, a loud neigh of a warhorse rang out from Dongxuan's formation, followed by the sound of galloping hooves. A majestic white horse galloped out. The person sitting on the horse was clad in golden armor like Fu Baogua, looking majestic. He galloped all the way to the front of the 2 armies and suddenly hollered, Fu Baogua. The person was Dongxuan's temporary marshal, Zhang Gu. He had actually come to the front of the formation personally. On the other side, Fu Baogua sat on the horse's back, his hawk-like gaze fixed on Zhang Gu, but he did not answer. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people from both sides, Zhang Gu spoke loudly, "Fu Baogua. You and I have been fighting until now. Although we have our own standpoints, fighting to the death for our respective masters, this battlefield is also where the greatest glory lies. You and I know very well that today is the last battle between both sides. You and I both know that today is the last battle between the two sides. Zhang Gu has specially come here to pay his respects to General Fu and to send him off." Then, Zhang Gu waved his hand and hollered, "Wine." Two riders came out from Dongxuan's formation to deliver the wine pouch. Zhang Gu took the wine pouch and took out a wine cup. He personally filled the cup and raised his hand. "Marshal Fu, regardless of who wins or loses this battle, it is still a matter for the future. However, it is the duty of a soldier to fight to the death on the battlefield. Let me give you a toast, and a toast to myself as well. If I die at the end of this battle, I have no complaints. If I die, please, if there's a next life, let's be a bosom friend." As he finished, Zhang Gu tipped his head back and drained the wine in his hand. Zhang Gu finished the 3 goblets in a row and wiped his mouth, speaking loudly again, "I know you're not willing to come out and drink this goblet with me, so I'll drink it myself. These 3 goblets of wine before this life and death battle are delightful, delightful. Ha ha ha." Coming out like this and toasting in such a manner, it showed the true nature of a soldier who was fearless of life and death. It also showed his magnanimity. Whether Zhang Ji's move was sincere or not, it was a beautiful move. There was another result to this, or rather, the biggest goal of Zhang Ji's move was to weaken Yutong's already brimming morale as much as possible, and at the same time, boost Dongxuan's morale with the confidence that they would win this battle. A fleeting glint of glee flashed across Zhang Ji's eyes. Han Sanhe watched from afar and could not help sighing. Both sides were on opposite ends of the spectrum. What was the point of playing these little tricks now that they had come to this juncture? Did you think Fu Baogua would let you off easy? Playing tricks in front of an expert like this would only be a futile effort, one that might even bring about one's own destruction. The reality was exactly as Han Sanhe had predicted. On Yutong's side, Fu Baogua's voice boomed like thunder. "Zhang Gu. This marshal has no interest in the 3 goblets of wine that you've come to offer. I don't agree with what you've said just now at all. I have a few words in my heart that I have to say." Zhang Gu said, "Please speak, Marshal Fu." What he wanted to do and what he wanted to say just now had all been said and done smoothly. Fu Baogua had not interrupted him at all. Now that Fu Baogua wanted to speak, if he were to interrupt him, he would appear to lack the demeanor of a general and shatter the confident atmosphere of victory that he had just built. At the very least, the effect would be greatly reduced. Fu Baogua guffawed. "Zhang Gu, you said just now that we each have our standpoints, we each serve our respective masters and we have no choice but to fight. I don't deny the first half of this, we do indeed serve our respective masters and standpoints. However, the latter part, we have no choice but to fight, I find it hard to agree with it." Chapter 5:10. Fu Baogua's voice was thick and strong, echoing above the battlefield. "Who are you people? What is your purpose in invading Yutong? To put it simply, you are invaders who have come to invade Yutong's great land. We, the soldiers who guard the border, are passively defending. We are the ones who have no choice but to fight. Only we have the right to use the words no choice but to fight. What right do you invaders have to say that you have no choice but to fight? As the saying goes, justice is in the hearts of the people, there is no distinction between right and wrong. What do you say that you have no choice but to fight is nonsense or perhaps a great joke. It's better that you hide quickly and don't make others laugh at you. Fu Baoguo's words were sonorous, his voice like a thunderclap as he spoke vehemently. You said that dying on the battlefield is the duty of a soldier. This, at its core, is understandable, but what do you all die on the battlefield for? For glory and wealth, but we die on the battlefield to protect our homes and defend our country against the invaders. Speaking of which, you are still not worthy of mentioning the word soldier's duty. The so-called greatest glory has nothing to do with you. Zhang Ji's expression changed. You also said that if you die on the battlefield, you have no complaints. If I die on the battlefield, I hope that we can be bosom friends in our next life. Fu Baoguo sneered. Let me give you a piece of advice. Keep your words to yourself and stop dreaming. Even if we die on the battlefield, even if there is a next life, we will never be bosom friends with you, the leader of the invaders. Be it life or death, be it this life or the next, you invaders will always be our greatest enemy. If there is a next life, I will only continue to enlist in the army and climb up the ranks to become the marshal again. I will fight you all on the battlefield again, to fight to the death. We, Yutong soldiers, have never been afraid of battle, but we have never been willing to initiate a war. Fu Baoguo said loudly, if you had not come, many of us would not have enlisted in the army. If you had not come, many of us would have preferred to stay at home, to live with our wives and children, to farm and cultivate, to grow old together, to unite with our neighbors, to be filial to the elderly, to teach our children. We were willing to be mediocre for the rest of our lives, willing to die of old age in the forest, unknown but peaceful and happy. But you have come, you invaders have come. We have no choice but to fight. If we don't fight, our homes will be destroyed. Our fathers, mothers, wives, and children will be killed. All of us will be enslaved. That's why we are standing here, fighting against you invaders. Now, in order to raise your morale, you actually say such shameless words. What is the greatest honor of a soldier? Coming from your mouth, it will only tarnish the duty of a soldier. Dongxian is not worthy of mentioning the so-called highest honor of a soldier. At this time and place, only we, the Yutong army, deserve to have it. This is ours. Fu Baoguo hollered. Yutong's 100,000-strong army was flushed with agitation, feeling like their hearts were about to explode from the gushing blood. They could not help shouting in unison, ours. The orderly and resolute voices were like thunder in the clear sky, shaking the 9 heavens. Zhang Ji's expression changed, and his pupils contracted rapidly. At this moment, he realized that he had failed. Not only did Yutong's morale, which had just been knocked down, recover after Fu Baoguo's words, it was even several times stronger than before. On the other hand, many of his men had their heads lowered, shame that came from the bottom of their hearts on their faces. Zhang Gu could not help groaning inwardly. He had not expected Fu Baoguo to not only be a cut above the rest in the art of war and strategy, but also to be so eloquent. His tongue was as sharp as a knife, and his words were sharp enough to draw blood. Zhang Gu was afraid that he had really outsmarted himself this time. Just as he was about to interrupt Fu Baoguo, he heard Fu Baoguo roar fiercely again, "There's only one sentence in your long speech that's right. You said that I'm not willing to come out and drink these 3 goblets of wine with you. You're right. I'm not willing. This Fu also drinks, but this Fu only drinks with friends, brothers, and fellow comrades. However, I, Fu Baoguo, will never drink with an invader. Are you worthy to drink with me?" Fu Baoguo guffawed, his voice like thunder. "Who do you think you are? You're only an invader who has come to invade my land, to invade my home, to kill my brothers, to maim my comrades. How dare you dream of drinking with me? Do you think you're worthy?" Pfft! Zhang Gu was trembling with rage when he heard him, hollering, "Fu Baoguo." Fu Baoguo ignored him and recited, "The hearts of Yutong's warriors, the bones of steel to fight against the nation. Today, when the nation is in danger, we won't hesitate to die." He hollered, "Beat the drums. Sound the bugles. Attack! The majestic war drums rang with Fu Baoguo's command. The bleak and desolate bugles seemed to have blown open the gates of hell as a boundless, menacing aura filled the air and engulfed the heaven and earth. Yutong's warriors, whose blood was already boiling to its boiling point, roared in unison, "Kill!" The sound of horse hooves rumbled like rolling thunder. There were 8 squads of cavalrymen, each of them holding a huge flag high as they charged forward like a raging dragon clearing a path. Wang Dingguo was in the center of the formation as he hollered, "The steel cavalry is here, who dares to invade our land?" Behind him, tens of thousands of steel cavalry responded in unison, "The steel cavalry is here. Who dares to invade our land?" Tens of thousands of people responded in unison, as if a hole had suddenly collapsed in the clear sky. Serving troop. Since we've enlisted, we shall serve our country with loyalty. Blood shall be shed on the battlefield at the border, we shall not let down our youth. Today, we shall serve our country with our lives. Kill! 100,000 soldiers charged forward like a tsunami, determined to fight to the death. Their target was Dongshuan's base, their aura was unparalleled as they looked down on the world. The military flag fluttered in the wind. Fu Baoguo stood at the back of Yutong's army, standing tall like a mountain, his aura imposing. His eyes were glued to the flag that was about to charge into the enemy's base and was gradually blurring, as if he was looking at his next life. He stood tall like a mountain, steady like an abyss, but his vision was already blurry. On the opposite side, the shadow cavalry had already moved out. Like a black wave, they surged from the horizon and rolled forward, blanketing the sky and earth. In an instant, they had already covered half of the battlefield, blocking their path. Extremes against extremes, the two armies had launched into a life-and-death battle the moment they came into contact. From this moment on, the final battle of Yutong's eastern frontline had begun. Good brother. Good man. We shall continue to fight together in our next life. I, Fu Baoguo, shall still be your marshal. Fu Baoguo squeezed his warhorse with both legs and pointed the sword in his hand forward. Just as he was about to urge his horse forward with a roar, his body, which was already charging forward, suddenly jerked and stiffened, inexplicably stopping its charge. At the same time, his eyes revealed a peculiar look of disbelief. Han Sanhe, who had been guarding the rear, felt it too. He stood up abruptly, his face ashen and unusually grim. It was at this moment that the whistling wind in the air suddenly changed direction from the northern wind that was in accordance with the weather, turning into a strong western wind. At this moment, the changes in the weather were sudden and without the slightest sign, and it even went against convention. Moreover, it was intense to the point it was unbelievable. The sudden, violent western wind swept the ground, bringing with it a cloud of dust and sand as it hurled towards the east. Yes, it was hurled over. At this very moment, the wind swept the sand and dust over. The violent wind howled, hissing in the air. In the blink of an eye, it had turned into an even more powerful hurricane. Gradually, it was no longer limited to sweeping the sand and dust, but it had also swept up the dust, snow, and ice on the ground. For a moment, the wind was like a hidden weapon descending from the sky, crashing towards Dongshuan's army along with the wind's momentum. At the same time, the wind and clouds gathered in the sky, gathering above the battlefield as if they had heard the order to assemble. In just a moment, the clouds were already densely packed, piling up into a thick layer. Above the thick layers of clouds, flashes of lightning could be seen from time to time. It was obvious that a large amount of lightning was brewing above the clouds. After a few breaths, the rumbling of thunder reverberated in the sky. The next moment, with a thunderous crack, a bolt of lightning fell from the sky. It was unknown if it was a coincidence or if it was the will of the heavens, but it exploded right in the middle of Dongshuan's shadow cavalry. Chapter 5:11. His recovery was almost complete. In the past few days, he would often sit in front of the computer. In the beginning, he would feel sore and tear up after looking at it for more than 10 minutes. Now, he could basically stay in front of the computer for 40 to 50 minutes before his eyes started to feel sore. Of course, he did not just look at the screen these few days. Naturally, he would also open a document and type a few words. He had rested for 3 to 4 days after his surgery. At that time, he really did not dare to look at it. Later on, he started to write a few hundred to 1,000 words intermittently every day, cough. Today, he actually wrote 2,000 words in one go. Then, his eyes could not take it anymore, and he started to tear up. He wrote so few words every day that he could not update normally. But looking at the situation, it would only be 3 to 4 days before he completely recovered. Therefore, he decided to start updating next Monday, the 29th. With the 5,000 to 6,000 words that he had written intermittently over the past few days as a foundation, he should not be too tired in the beginning. Therefore, there was no need for everyone to worry. After not updating for so long, this was the first time in his 10 years of professional life that he felt as if something was missing in his life. He was finally coming back. Thank you for your concern. This time, he was very proud of himself. Although he did not update for nearly 20 days, he basically did not fall behind in his monthly votes. Every time he saw it, he felt a warm feeling in his heart. How could he bear to leave when all of you are so cute? See you on Monday afternoon. Chapter 5:12. If Yutong's Eastern Frontline's charge was said to be the prelude to this extreme war, then this lightning strike was also the prelude to heaven's might. After the first lightning strike, thick bolts of lightning fell from the sky and landed within Dongxuan's formation. How could the power of heaven and earth be resisted by humans? Men screamed and horses neighed. It was a tragic sight. The power of heaven and earth was unstoppable. Dongxuan's misfortune continued as they endured the natural disaster. Not long after the countless bolts of lightning struck, a charred smell began to spread from the ground. Perhaps it was a dozen breaths later, or perhaps it was only the very next moment, with a deafening explosion, streaks of fire dragons appeared out of thin air and rose abruptly, engulfing the entire Dongxian camp in the blink of an eye. In just the blink of an eye, the dozens of miles of Dongxuan's camp had turned into a sea of fire. The lightning and fire appeared at the same time, their power unstoppable. What was worse was that it was reasonable to say that the ground fire had appeared out of nowhere due to the west wind, burning Dongxuan's base. It was understandable and barely acceptable, but why did the lightning strike from the sky seem to have eyes of its own? It only targeted Dongxuan's soldiers and not a single Yutong soldier perished under the boundless lightning? This was a little too far-fetched. Even a novel would not dare to write something like this. Unfortunately, there was still more to come. With another deafening boom, a huge crack appeared on the ground closer to Dongxuan's formation. It was like the gates of hell had suddenly opened. Countless Dongxian soldiers fell into the crack, caught off guard. Water that came out of nowhere poured in. It was obvious that many of the soldiers who had fallen into the crack were no longer spared. What happened next was the few peaks where Dongxian had set up camp. They collapsed without warning. For a moment, the ground was like a pot of boiling water, constantly churning and tumbling. Both men and horses could not stand and fell. It was a true earth dragon turning over, and it was not just one earth dragon, but a few of them at the same time. How could the commotion be insignificant? As far as the eye could see, the ground within a 100-mile radius was rumbling and rumbling. Blood-curdling screams and wails filled the air. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were all screaming in despair. It was the hopeless wail of people on the brink of death. However, the change was not over yet. Streaks of crimson patterns weaved into a huge net in the air and fell with a swoosh. All the Dongxian soldiers who were shrouded in crimson howled in agony without exception. Thin streaks of blood shot out from the pores on their bodies as they died instantly. There were flashes of golden light. The weapons in the hands of countless Dongxian soldiers were sheathed after the flash of golden light. When they landed on their opponents, they would at most injure their tendons and bones. It was difficult to inflict further damage. The difficulty of taking their opponent's life had increased exponentially. All the sabers, swords, spears, and spears had turned into burning sticks made of scrap metal at this moment. These were the signs of Dongxian suffering from natural and earthly disasters, while Yutong was also affected by the phenomenon. Streaks of green light could be seen everywhere in Yutong's army. Yutong's soldiers who were touched by the green light were instantly invigorated, even those who had been severely injured. Most of their injuries were healed and they were brimming with energy, as if they had been resurrected on the spot and were ready to fight again. As far as the eye could see, the sky was covered in layers of clouds that contained lightning and thunder. On the ground, the wind was fueling the fire while the fire bore the might of the wind. It had long turned Dongxuan's orderly troops into a pot of porridge. A pot of mushy porridge. Zhang Gu hollered with all his might, trying his best to recall the army and stabilize their footing. However, the frequent natural and earthly disasters had long surpassed the limits of human control. How could they possibly regroup? By then, Dongxuan's morale had completely collapsed. The wind blew. Fire. Earth dragon. Lightning. Lightning. Water. Blood. Wood. Everything was so familiar. There was only one possibility for such a familiar phenomenon to attack Dongxian but help Yutong. Perhaps it was an explanation. The Nine Supremes. Indeed, the clouds in the sky tumbled violently before 8 huge words appeared. Everyone on the battlefield could see it clearly. It was clear to them, the mighty Yutong, the mighty Nine Supremes. Han Sanhe closed his eyes dejectedly. It was over. The situation that he feared the most had finally happened. Along the way, he had let Zhang Gu be in charge of the main battle. Other than training Zhang Gu so that he, as his successor, could claim all the military merits and obtain the ultimate achievement of defeating Yutong's top young prodigy, there was another concern. Once the Nine Supremes appeared, there would be room to turn things around with him as the backup. However, when the Fortress of Resilience was breached, Supreme Cloud had not appeared. When Qiu Jianhan was on the brink of death and Yutong's elites were trapped, Supreme Cloud had still not appeared. Even when the army had been suppressing Yutong's army, Supreme Cloud had not appeared until now. The outcome was almost certain. Although Han Sanhe's teachings to Zhang Gu were filled with warning and he was even a little pessimistic about the outcome of the battle, Han Sanhe had already come to a conclusion in his heart. Zhang Gu against Fu Baogua, no matter how brutal the battle was, no matter how many casualties Dongxian had to pay, this battle would still be won. Based on the current situation, it could be confirmed that Supreme Cloud had indeed been killed. At the very least, he was trapped. Otherwise, it was impossible for him not to appear when Yutong was on the brink of annihilation. He was not fated to participate in this battle. Then, everything was simple. No matter how glorious the final outcome of this battle was, only death awaited him when he returned. In that case, it would be better to hand the great merit to Zhang Ji's hands and hasten his rise to fame, grooming the next generation of invincible marshals for Dongxian. Although the consequences for Han Sanhe were unavoidable, Dongxian still had his successor, Zhang Gu, alive and well. His family, children, and descendants would not be too miserable no matter what. The military would always back him up. In spite of this, just as Han Sanhe let down his guard and quietly observed the aftermath of the battle, it was also the most unexpected moment. The power of the Nine Supremes' manifestation powers had appeared once again. Furthermore, this time, it wasn't like the last few times, where there were only 2 or 3 phenomena that appeared. This time, it was like the Nine Supremes' manifestation powers had appeared at the same time to wreak havoc on the battlefield. Almost immediately, all of Dongxuan's troops were dumbfounded. How was this possible? How was this possible? Even if Supreme Cloud was not dead, even if he had come, he should not have been able to create such a terrifying outcome. The manifestations appeared before their eyes, the lightning and fire, the mountains and rivers changing color, the wind and cloud surging, the web of blood, metal, and wind, everything was proof that this was not something that could be done by one person. It was obvious that the Nine Supremes were not dead, not even one of them had died. Moreover, all of them had appeared together. This was how such a situation could be created. Did the 8 words in the sky prove this point, declaring that the Nine Supremes were not dead and had made a comeback at this moment? How was this possible? Dongxuan's soldiers were unwilling to believe that this was true, but everything that they had endured was proof that this was the truth. The Nine Supremes had arrived at the same time and the manifestation of the 9 manifestations. How could there be anyone in this world who could resist them? They were already on the brink of collapse. Even if they were to continue fighting, they would only be sacrificing a few lives for nothing. At this point, it was absolutely impossible to turn the tide of the battle. Defeat was inevitable. Sound the gong, retreat. Han Sanhe closed his eyes helplessly and waved his hand. At this moment, all hope was lost. Only those who had personally experienced the power of the Nine Supremes and the 9 manifestations could truly understand its power. Back then, the Empire of Dayuan at the southern border had also had the upper hand in terms of military strength, but it could not withstand the combined might of the manifestation powers. It had crumbled with a single touch. Now, the facts had proven that Dongxian was no exception to the rule. The power of the Nine Supremes was indeed the ultimate weapon of war in this world. It was unparalleled. Unlike Dongxuan's despair, Yutong's military formation was the complete opposite. Yutong's warriors could not help but cheer deafeningly at this familiar scene that they had not seen for a long time, especially the sudden sense of bliss. 9 Supremes Lords! 9 Supremes Lords! Deafening cheers rang throughout the battlefield almost instantly. All of Yutong's warriors were guffawing like they had been injected with adrenaline, charging forward with unstoppable momentum. Kill! The 9 Supremes Lords are here. Yutong is saved. We're saved. This is the last battle, but it's Dongxuan's last battle. Yes, 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 victory belongs to us. Kill these invaders. Many of the veterans were so moved that tears streamed down their cheeks. Just when they had resigned themselves to their fate and were ready to fight to the death, the 9 Supremes Lords had finally appeared. Fu Baogua, who had just snapped back to reality and was charging forward, was almost frozen from the ecstasy on his face. Only hot tears were streaming down his cheeks. After some time, he suddenly guffawed, tears still rolling down his cheeks as he roared in a hoarse voice, "Mighty Yutong! Mighty 9 Supremes! Mighty Yutong, mighty 9 Supremes!" Countless people were shouting the slogan with all their might, almost coughing blood from their throats. It was as if they could not vent the extreme happiness and excitement in their hearts if they did not shout like that. Yutong's morale was unstoppable, like a ferocious tiger descending the mountain. Dongxuan's military was dispirited, their morale plunging to freezing point. There was no longer any will to fight. Even the Shadow Cavalry, who was known for their military discipline and was known as the most elite, was in a state of disarray, unable to retaliate. Facing the 9 Supremes at the same time, who would dare say they could resist? That was the true power of heaven and earth. It was not something that a human could fight against. Chapter 5:13. Fortunately, Han Sanhe's signal rang out haphazardly. After a while, it finally became a unified command, bringing some direction to the disorderly morale of the army. Dongxuan's troops turned around and ran back with all their might, retreating like a receding tide. At this point, they could only think of running, to leave the range of the heaven and earth's might as soon as possible. In spite of this, Yutong's morale was high. Chase. Kill. Their only thought was to charge and kill as they gave chase. Zhang Ge still did not want to retreat. The glory of 1,000 years was within his grasp, within his reach. He was about to secure the absolute position of the continent's hegemon. Yet, such a fatal turn of events had happened at this crucial moment. Zhang Ji's head was buzzing. Don't retreat. We have the advantage in numbers. Hold on, hold on. Zhang Ji's eyes were bloodshot. He drew his sword and killed a few of the defeated soldiers personally, trying to control the situation. However, with his strength alone, how could he stop the tens of thousands of soldiers who had already collapsed? Even if he were to kill without stopping, how many people could he kill? The truth was cruel. Not only could Zhang Ge not stop the fleeing soldiers, he was instead surrounded by them, retreating involuntarily. When he came to his senses, he had already retreated all the way out of the fortress of resilience. Where's teacher? Where's teacher? Zhang Ge shouted in a frenzy, looking flustered. In such a critical moment, the only person he could think of was his omnipotent teacher, the god of war, Han Sanhe. It was a pity. The defeated army was like a landslide. Even if Han Sanhe were to step forward personally, he could not change the situation. No matter how elite the troop was, once the morale of the army collapsed and they retreated like this, even if a real deity descended from heaven, he would be helpless, let alone the continent's god of war. Under such circumstances, Han Sanhe could gather the defeated soldiers and run in one direction. It was already a feat worthy of a peerless marshal. Yutong's warriors were like ferocious tigers that had just been let out of their cage, chasing after the enemy bravely without letting up. They had been holding back for such a long time, now was the time for revenge. If he didn't do his best to kill the enemy and take revenge now, when would he? Even a soldier with a broken leg would struggle to find a horse to ride and use all his strength to chase after the enemy. Avenge our fallen brothers. Li Erniu, did you see that? The 9 Supremes Lords are here, we've won, we've avenged you. Boss Qi, the spirits in the netherworld must be overjoyed. Revenge. Kill them all. Kill all these invaders. Yutong will not allow enemies to wreak havoc. Those who invade Yutong shall be killed, no matter how strong they are. Fu Baoguo commanded the troops to give the order to pursue and kill them. Chase after them. Chase them until they're all dead. Honestly, Fu Baoguo did not want to pursue her so thoroughly. Fu Baoguo understood this better than anyone else. This was a great taboo for commanders and generals, and a great taboo for strategists. Although Dongxian was defeated now, with Han Sanhe and Zhang Ji's abilities, it would not take long for them to rebuild their army, perhaps with just a place to settle down. Although the army was temporarily routed, it did not mean that it would be routed forever. If they were to be bitten back, it would cause a change in the favorable situation. In spite of this, Fu Baoguo had to give chase now. He had already realized that something was not right with the situation. The 9 Supremes' power had only been unleashed once just now. The unstoppable force was unparalleled, but it seemed like each of them had only attacked once. After that, there had been no more movements, as if the 9 Supremes had stopped. This was not a situation that should have happened. Although the advantage of both sides had been reversed, Dongxuan's losses were still limited and their foundation was still intact. As long as they cleaned up the defeated soldiers and regrouped, the situation would change once again. Therefore, the 9 Supremes should continue to unleash their manifestation powers to assist Yutong and secure their victory. Therefore, Fu Baoguo immediately realized that the 9 Supremes' power would only have this one chance to attack. Could it be that something really happened? The 9 Supremes had not made a move previously because of some reason. Now that they were in a precarious situation, they were finally forced to make a move, but even if they did, it would be as far as they could go. If that was the case, then they could only continue chasing and fighting. They had to maximize the results of this battle as much as they could. They had to extend the time that Han Sanhe had the chance to catch his breath. If his guess was right, Yutong's disaster would still come once Han Sanhe had the time to catch his breath. The danger might even be greater than before. Yutong's troops' morale was at its peak now, it was time to push on. If they were to slow down, they would fall into a stage of exhaustion. If Dongxian were to retaliate, Yutong would suffer a great defeat immediately and their combat power would be diminished due to the interference of various negative emotions. The final outcome would not even be as good as when the soldiers fought to their deaths. After all, it was difficult to have the thought of fighting for their lives now that there was hope. How could a person's emotions change drastically again and again? Especially now that the fortress of resilience was gone. With this natural defense line gone, it would take at least a year to rebuild it. At this moment, a deafening neigh could be heard as a red silhouette sprang up from Yutong's troop like a bolt of lightning. Riding on the red silhouette was a purple silhouette. The man and the horse were as one as they sped towards the direction where Dongxuan's retreating troop was at a breakneck speed. Han Sanhe. Give me your life. Fu Baoguo was shocked. Yunyang? How could it be him? Why was he here? Had he not left with the old marshal and the others? What was going on? Before he could figure it out, the red silhouette had already sped away, vanishing from sight. Dongxuan's troops were still retreating, running back like the tide. Although Zhang Gu had killed many of the retreating soldiers in hopes of stabilizing the situation and stabilizing the troops' morale, it was a pity that human strength was insignificant before the apocalyptic force of heaven and earth. Not only was he unable to turn the tide, he was even swept away by the countless retreating soldiers. Fortunately, Zhang Gu was unable to stabilize the troops' morale, but Dongxian still had a stabilizing force. On the other side of Dongxuan's camp, a huge flag was erected. This flag looked extraordinary at first glance. Just the surface of the flag alone was about 10 times the size of an ordinary flag. It must be extraordinary. All the Dongxian soldiers who were retreating were charging forward with their heads lowered, hoping to be a step closer to safety and leave the area covered by the terrifying force of heaven as soon as possible. However, there were those who lifted their heads occasionally, and those who did would see the war flag that was more than 300 feet tall, appearing in the sky in front of them like a red cloud. Anyone who saw it would feel their heart calm down inexplicably. The God of War's flag. It was the God of War's flag, Han Sanhe's personal flag. The 8 golden words on the flag shone brilliantly. The strong wind blew the flag until it was as straight as a line, as if it was embedded in the air, detached from the world. 8 words were written on the flag. A sword light that chills the mountains and rivers. Han Sanhe. The main reason why Dongxuan's soldiers were defeated was due to the sudden appearance of the force of heaven and earth. It was unstoppable and unstoppable, but a large part of it was due to the incompetence of the current leader. Zhang Gu could not win against Fu Baoguo in terms of words at the beginning of the battle. Not only did he lose his morale, he had even lost his status. The troops' morale was no longer just restless, it was rather lethargic. If they could gain the upper hand in this battle and fight with the wind, it would be fine. However, now that the entire line had failed and they were completely routed, how could the troops' morale remain? Chapter 5:14. Dongxuan's soldiers did not trust Zhang Gu at all. Now that they were defeated, survival was their top priority. However, Han Sanhe's appearance had given them hope. The war was dangerous and they were at a disadvantage, but it would be better to gather by the continent's god of war's side. The title of the continent's god of war was not just for show. As the flag of the god of war fluttered in the wind, a series of bugles rumbled beneath the flag. On the other side, there were 5,000 shadow knights who had just formed into an army. Although they still looked a little disheveled, they had already formed a battle formation. Facing the hundreds of thousands of fleeing soldiers, they did not move an inch. They wanted to turn the tide and were ready to go. As time went on, the blare of the horns gradually merged into one, boosting the morale of the army. Among Dongxuan's men who had gathered, Han Sanhe rode on a warhorse at the front, wearing a snow-white marten coat. His gaze was calm as he watched his troops flee in disarray, his expression unchanging. There was only one message being conveyed by the incessant blare of the horns: return. Gather the troops. Fall into formation. The current quiet atmosphere restored Dongxuan's morale to all the routed soldiers who had witnessed the scene. After all, these troops were Dongxuan's elite troop, the cream of the crop. Dongxuan's cannon fodder, rabble, and aristocratic martial prowess that had invaded Yutang this time had been filled by Han Sanhe to fill the gap of flesh and blood in front of the fortress of resilience. The remaining Dongxian soldiers were warriors who had gone through countless battles of steel and blood. Even if such an elite troop was in a state of defeat due to some unusual factors, as long as there was something that could shock them, they would be able to recover swiftly. Han Sanhe was the one who was able to shock them to their core. More and more soldiers stopped in their tracks, their initially fearful gazes regaining their clarity after a momentary flicker. One by one, they stepped forward and joined Dongxuan's troop, getting into formation. Some of the lower-ranking officers had even begun to reorganize their troops. 5th Battalion, 7th Squad, 3rd Column. Gather here. 3rd Battalion, 1st Column, 2nd Squad. Here, here. F***CK, hurry up. Gather. Stop running. Come and gather. The moment Han Sanhe raised the flag of God of War and revealed himself so casually, he managed to quell the fear and panic of the million-strong army. More and more Dongxian soldiers began to line up behind Han Sanhe. An awe-inspiring aura that belonged solely to soldier was brewing again. This was where Han Sanhe's brilliance came from. He was well aware of his own strengths and weaknesses. It was true that he was known as the continent's god of war, but he was not a true immortal. Even if he had flashed the flag of God of War, it would have been futile. There was a 99% chance that he would follow in Zhang Ji's footsteps and be scattered by the routed army. That would have been a massive defeat and there would be no turning back. Therefore, he took the first step and waited at the place where the army had retreated 100 miles, raising his military flag. Given the current situation, the routed army had to be given a buffer. It was only at such a time when the stamina of the routed army that had been running for their lives was almost depleted. Most importantly, the fear of the unknown force was almost numb to them and they needed someone to rely on, a pillar of support. Only then could Han Sanhe's sudden appearance achieve such a stunning effect. This logic sounded simple, but under such circumstances, there were at most 3 people in the entire continent who were able to stand out and forcefully stop the defeated army from falling to the ground. In the entire continent, there were at most 3 people who could do this. In order to achieve this, the commander-in-chief must have the ability to remain calm in the face of danger and have unparalleled prestige in the army. Neither of these 2 qualities could be lacking. It was truly a feat that could not be accomplished by ordinary people. Dongxuan's routed army surged like the tide. Looking from afar, Han Sanhe's side was like a pillar of support amidst the raging waves, a pillar of stability. The routed army was like a raging tide, but when it passed by Han Sanhe, the pillar of stability, it quickly turned from a torrent to a slow stream before it stopped and regained its momentum. It was nothing short of a miracle. This was what it meant to be able to turn the tide. Zhang Gu retreated with the routed army, almost coughing blood along the way. When they finally came close and slowed down, Zhang Gu still wanted to draw his sword to slash and suppress the routed army, but he realized that the speed at which the soldiers around him were fleeing had slowed to a crawl. Perhaps it should be said that they were no longer fleeing, but advancing slowly. Zhang Gu sucked in a deep breath and looked over. Once he saw the solemn military formation, tears fell from Zhang Ji's eyes. He choked, "Teacher." Han Sanhe remained silent and unmoving, his gaze calm as he waved his hand lightly. Zhang Gu felt his body brimming with energy as he strode over. In just a few steps, he had regained his composure. When he came to stand beside Han Sanhe, he was completely composed, even the dejection of his defeat had vanished without a trace. Even if the sky were to fall, everything would be fine as long as his teacher was here. The continent's god of war was the only one who respected his teacher. With his teacher here, so what if the 9 supremes were to come together? Dust billowed from afar. Han Sanhe narrowed his eyes, looking at where the smoke was rising into the sky, and said faintly, "That's where the only chance to turn the tide of this battle lies. Zhang Gu, remember this. This is the last chance that I can teach you and allow you to learn from me." Zhang Ji's face was filled with sorrow. "Yes. Watch closely." There was no expression on Han Sanhe's face, only endless indifference. His gaze was distant as he looked into the distance. Fleeing is the most humiliating thing in a general's life, but it's something that can't be avoided. Once it happens, it's the worst-case scenario in a general's life. However, nothing is absolute in this world. Even when the crisis is right before your eyes and you're in a hopeless situation, there's still a chance to turn things around. As long as you don't panic and still have the prestige of stabilizing the army's morale, you can seize the opportunity to turn the tide of the battle. Even if it doesn't work out, you can still retreat in one piece and not suffer a crushing defeat. The current state of the battle has been reversed. The enemy has gained the upper hand, but it's not yet a victory. If the enemy's general is greedy for victory and doesn't know that he's going to lose, he's going to pursue us with all his might, causing his attack formation to fall into disarray. Then, we might still have a chance to turn the tide of the battle. Han Sanhe said faintly, "Let's see if Fu Baogua can still maintain his composure at such a time. If he can, his position as Tianxuan's god of war will be secured and we can retreat in one piece. On the other hand, if he can't, we'll charge back tonight. There's a huge disparity in our military strength. Even though our army has just been defeated, our combined combat power is still above Yutong's eastern troop." Zhang Gu answered humbly and seriously, "Yes. What I said isn't only for Fu Baogua. It's the same for anyone you're facing, any general. As a general, remaining calm in the face of danger is the demeanor of a great general. Not wavering even in death." Han Sanhe's voice seemed to come from a faraway place as he said, "You must remember these words of mine. You can't forget them no matter what, you can't lose your composure. That's why I said that you've disappointed me this time." Han Sanhe said solemnly, "When the army was defeated, you, as the marshal, didn't flee first, but you didn't manage to stabilize the army's morale. You couldn't avoid being held hostage by the defeated army. After today's defeat, of course, you should follow the troops, but what you should do is to send your own bodyguards ahead of time with your marshal's flag. Go ahead and raise your marshal's flag on the road that we must pass 60 or even 80 li away. You didn't react as a marshal. Along the way, I've only seen your indignation, your rage, your despair, your violence, and your murder. I didn't see your composure, your unruffled mind despite the defeat. Based on this alone, you're already far from Fu Baogua's level." Han Sanhe's gaze was distant. "If you can't overcome the fear in your heart, you'll never be able to be a qualified marshal. I hope that the disappointment I feel today ends today. There won't be a next time, never. Yes. This disciple will remember. I won't let you down again." Zhang Gu lowered his head in shame. There were still countless defeated soldiers from Dongxuan's side fleeing for their lives. At the same time, there was also the thunderous clatter of hooves coming from where the thick smoke was rising. Yutong's cavalry had caught up. Han Sanhe listened and chuckled bitterly. The situation that I'm most unhappy about has happened. Fu Baogua isn't greedy for victory, nor is he panicking. The clatter of the hooves is still grand and orderly. Han Sanhe shook his head. Turning defeat into victory is only a wild wish now. Zhang Gu looked disappointed. With my understanding of Fu Baogua, it's only reasonable and expected for such a situation to occur. It's alright, though. Now, let me teach you another lesson. Han Sanhe said faintly, this lesson is called, the merciful should never command an army. Chapter 5:15. Before his words echoed in the air, Han Sanhe's expression turned cold and ruthless as he raised his right hand lightly. What followed was a series of commands that rang out resolutely behind him. In front of them, the countless fleeing Dongxian soldiers saw that they had regained their footing and were regrouping. It was as if hope had dawned upon them and they were about to return to their troops. However, they were shocked to see tens of thousands of longbows drawn, the arrowheads glinting coldly as they pointed at the sky in front of them. There were many Dongxian soldiers who saw this, but they did not know the purpose of this action and who it was aimed at. Yutong's pursuing troops were still a distance away, they were not even within the range of the arrows. Was this not an aimless shot? Teacher. Zhang Ji's heart skipped a beat when he saw the situation. Han Sanhe ignored Zhang Ji's call and ordered faintly, release the arrows. Swoosh, 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 countless sharp arrows covered the entire sky in an instant. The arrows that blanketed the sky were not aimless. The fleeing Dongxian soldiers who were still surging forward suffered the sudden rain of arrows almost unprepared, collapsing with cries of agony. With just a single wave of arrows, no less than 10,000 routed soldiers were killed on the spot. They were the last part of Dongxuan's fleeing troops, the link between Dongxian and Yutong's pursuing troops. Han Sanhe had cut off this link for the sake of the follow-up battle, like a warrior who had cut off his wrist, ruthlessly. The rain of arrows stopped as the thick stench of blood permeated the air. The stench of blood had always been a common occurrence on the battlefield, but the source of such a huge commotion and casualties was their own people. It was inevitable that it was different from the past. The entire Dongxian troop suddenly fell into an unprecedented silence. It was the duty of a soldier to obey orders. It was not that the tens of thousands of archers did not know what they were doing, but since the order was given by their superior, they had to execute it. Although they already had a rough idea of what to do, the reality was still shocking and chilling to the core. Since the tens of thousands of archers were acting this way, the other Dongxian soldiers were even more fearful and doubtful. I know what you want to say, Han Sanhe said expressionlessly, it's not too late to wait for them to rejoin the troop. In fact, as long as we mobilize the Shadow Knights that have already been gathered to support them, they will be able to return safely, right? Zhang Gu stared straight ahead at the black mass of corpses of his comrades. The corpses were like porcupines. He felt as if his heart was being cut by a knife. For a moment, he actually forgot to reply. But you've forgotten that time waits for no man. Let's not talk about how they're going to deal with Yutong's pursuing troops if they rush over and have no time to get into formation. Han Sanhe said coldly, furthermore, their so-called return will only cause another wave of chaos to the troops that have already formed their combat capabilities. You have to know that at this point in time, even the slightest disturbance will cause a huge impact. We won't have the room to reorganize the troops anymore. At that time, as long as the enemy charges and establishes an advantage, they will be able to trigger the panic from before. At that time, it would truly be a crushing defeat, and they would die a graveless death. Han Sanhe uttered faintly, battle song. Although Han Sanhe's voice was nonchalant, his tone was cold and harsh. Zhang Gu shuddered when he heard him, lifting his head in terror. Teacher. Listen carefully, watch carefully. This is the last time I'm teaching you. Han Sanhe said rather ominously, what comes next is another lesson. This time, it's called, cultivation of aura. Before his words echoed in the air, he waved his hand. Suddenly, a loud roar erupted from the Janissaries. Roar. Then, thousands of people roared at the same time. The sound was earth-shattering and deafening. Fight! 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 All the soldiers and steeds, all the soldiers were energized at once. Then, a voice hollered, chill with a sword. Mountains and rivers. The voice was unexpectedly majestic and impassioned. 3,000 Janissaries puffed out their chests at the same time, shouting with all their might, chill with a sword, mountains and rivers. Another person's voice rang out, chill with a sword, mountains and rivers. This time, there were more echoes. Chill with a sword, mountains and rivers. It was no longer a call for 100 or 1,000 responses, but tens of thousands of people. Then, another voice led the way, chill with a sword, mountains and rivers. All the 200,000 Dongxian soldiers who were already in formation chanted in unison, chill with a sword, mountains and rivers. In the end, everyone, be it the injured, the Janissaries or the routed soldiers, roared at the same time, their voices growing more and more uniform. More and more forceful. More and more direct. The flag was waved. The cheering stopped abruptly. However, Zhang Gu could clearly feel the soaring fighting spirit, the invincible aura, coalescing into form amidst these few chants. They were routed soldiers who had just been gathered, but they had formed an aura that was sharper than a dagger in a matter of moments. Zhang Gu even felt a surge of confidence that even if Fu Baoguo were to arrive with his army, he would be able to fight them with such a troop in his hands. There was only awe in Zhang Ji's heart at this moment. Han Sanhe's method of reorganizing the army seemed ordinary, at most, but to be able to achieve such a feat at a time like this, when they were on the losing end, was truly a miracle. It was unbelievable. On the opposite side, Yutong's cavalry appeared amidst the smoke and dust as expected, their ferocious aura not diminishing at all. Han Sanhe squinted and said, the aura has been formed, but it's a pity that the combat power is still incomplete. This is the third lesson I'll teach you, and the last lesson I'll teach you in this life. This lesson is called sacrifice. Zhang Ji's heart skipped a beat as he lifted his head to look at Han Sanhe and cried out involuntarily, Teacher, you. Han Sanhe stared at the opposite side with narrowed eyes. A rush of galloping could be heard as a crimson cloud burst out from Yutong's cavalry formation. It took only a few breaths, but it had already traversed thousands of feet and arrived before Dongxuan's troop alone. As the crimson cloud arrived, a voice filled with murderous intent rang out, Han Sanhe, since you're already here, do you still think you can leave? A tall and majestic crimson steed entered Dongxuan's sight. The red steed was taller than ordinary horses by at least 1.5 heads, and its body was almost 2.5 meters tall. Its entire body was covered in red fur, and it stood there like a burning flame, raging endlessly. The pair of horse eyes were filled with intelligence. When their gazes met, Dongxuan's people actually felt a faint sense of disdain. Disdain? This was merely a horse, but it actually gave off the feeling that it did not even consider the 200,000 soldiers in front of it worthy of its attention. It stood there, its red mane floating in the air like flames. It looked at the group as if saying, all of you are trash. On the horse's back, a person stood tall and straight, equally arrogant and disdainful. That handsome and exquisite face made everyone feel ashamed of their own inferiority. His figure was tall and slender, like a jade tree in the wind. His purple robe fluttered slightly in the wind, but his gaze was like a bolt of lightning, filled with boundless iciness. As he scanned the Dongxian troop in front of him, his gaze focused on Han Sanhe. The long saber in the man's hand was still gleaming with a crimson glow. It was a ghastly sight, but there was a hint of a cruel smile on his face. Ha ha ha. Han Sanha's chuckle rang out calmly. His eyes were filled with admiration as he looked at Yun Yang and said with a smile, "So it's young Master Yun who has graced us with your presence. It looks like this old and useless one hasn't guessed wrongly. Young Master Yun is no ordinary person indeed." Yun Yang smiled faintly and said, "I'm very pleased to be looked upon so highly by Marshal Han." This time, Han Sanha's composure struck Yun Yang as something special and unexpected. Han Sanha could feel Yun Yang's deific sense lingering on him. He could not shake it off no matter what he said under such circumstances, he could not help feeling apprehensive. Other than being the publicly acknowledged god of war, Han Sanha also had considerable cultivation base attainment that was no weaker than old Marshal Qiu or Leng Daoyin. He was already at the pinnacle realm's advanced level. Based on his talent alone, Dongxian might lose a god of war, but it might gain a heaven realm cultivator if he were to devote himself to cultivation. In spite of this, Han Sanha had already circulated his deific consciousness to its maximum, but he still could not break free from Yun Yang's harassment. The only reason was that Yun Yang's cultivation base was far above Han Sanha's and had reached a height that exceeded Han Sanha's knowledge. Han Sanha was not the only one who was shocked, the experts beside him were equally shocked. Chapter 5:16. Han Sanha was speechless. His warhorse was kneeling with its front hooves on the ground, its head lowered like it had committed a crime, like a condemned prisoner. Although Han Sanha was still riding on the horse, his feet were already touching the ground. No matter how calm Han Sanha was in the face of death, he could not help but feel utterly speechless. After a pause, Han Sanha dismounted his warhorse and stood with his arms behind his back. He smiled faintly and said, "Looks like this old man has been blind, and I have been disrespectful. Young Master Yun's horse is actually the legendary king of horses, one that only appears once every 10,000 years. The legend of the king appearing and all horses bowing down to him is true. Young Master Yun is truly blessed. King of horses, this marshal apologizes sincerely for my lack of manners." Yun Yang said sincerely, "Marshal Han, how gracious you are." Han Sanha said faintly, "This is probably the only grace a defeated general has left." He laughed and said in a carefree manner, "As a militant, the greatest fortune is to be born in troubled times and to be able to build one's career. However, in this heavenly world of soldiers, a powerful weapon that shouldn't exist has appeared. It's a gift from the heavens that destroys the balance of everything." Yun Yang nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. Yutong's 9 Supremes, such an existence shouldn't have appeared in this world, nor should it have appeared on the battlefield. The existence of the 9 Supremes is the nightmare of all militants and marshals, it's also the source of their sorrow." Han Sanha sucked in a long breath. No matter how many schemes there are, they can't stand up to the power of nature. In the face of such boundless might, the so-called talent of a commander is nothing but a joke. Han Sanha said faintly, "Actually, the 9 Supremes are not only the sorrow of this old man and the marshals of the 4 empires, they are also the sorrow of Yutong's marshals like Tai Zheng and Fu Baogua. Young Master Yun, do you agree with this?" Yun Yang nodded. "I agree with this argument as well. However, the root of this matter concerns our respective standpoints, so I'm very happy to see such an existence that shouldn't exist in Yutong. The stronger it is, the better. Shouldn't the enemy's nightmare be our Yutong's favorite sight?" Han Sanha guffawed. "Well said. If the 9 Supremes were in Dongxian, this old man would think the same. Of course, I wouldn't mind." While both of them were talking, Yutong's troop had arrived as well. They were slightly further away from Han Sanha, the army was majestic, their flags fluttering in the wind. Naturally, Fu Baogua came along as well. Along the way, Fu Baogua dared not be idle at all. He was afraid that Yutong's army would be greedy for victory and their formation would fall into disarray, giving the enemy a chance to counterattack. Otherwise, they would not have arrived at this time. However, Fu Baogua could not help but feel suspicious when he saw the confrontation between the two armies. His military experience told him that there might be a great turning point right before his eyes. Although Yutong's army had the upper hand now, it was not a victory. After all, Dongxuan's military strength was still present and its combined combat power was still far superior to Yutong's eastern troop. Any sudden change could change the tides of the war. He watched as Yun Yang and Han Sanhe conversed from afar. Seeing that both of them seemed to be chatting happily, occasionally guffawing, he could not help touching his face and murmuring, "I didn't expect Marquis Yun's young master to have such a relationship with Han Sanhe. He's an expert indeed, his actions are unpredictable." Seeing that both of them seemed to be done with their conversation, Fu Baogua galloped out, joining the conversation of the century. Yun Yang did not turn back, his eyes still trained on Han Sanhe as he said with a faint smile, "Our true protagonist, Fu Baogua, is here." An inexplicable cloud flashed across Han Sanhe's eyes, as if all the glory he had in the past had flashed past his eyes at this very moment. Then, he straightened his back and continued to place his arms behind his back, looking up at Fu Baogua who was riding over. "Marshal Han, it's been a long time. We meet again." Fu Baogua hopped off his steed and strode over when he was near. Although the two armies were at each other's throats and there was no room for negotiation, everyone in the military would still respect Han Sanhe, the legendary god of war of his generation. Even when they hated him to the core, they still respected him like a deity. Han Sanhe watched Fu Baogua with his arms behind his back. After a long time, admiration shone in his eyes. Fu Baogua has indeed become a pillar of support. Yutong's fortune. I dare not. Marshal Han praises me too much. Fu Baogua said, the current battle was truly a fluke. Han Sanhe shook his head and said, how can there be flukes in a war? You, Fu Baogua, are indeed qualified to compete on the battlefield with any famous general in this world. This is an indisputable fact, a reality. Fu Baogua smiled and said seriously, luck has always been a part of one's ability, but this luck of mine is really just luck. If Marshal Han had commanded the previous battle personally, Yutong's eastern troop could only win even with the help of the 9 Supreme's lords. It would have been impossible for them to achieve such a result. This is also the truth. Han Sanhe smiled faintly and sighed discreetly. At this point, there was no need for modesty anymore. Han Sanhe knew that Fu Baogua was speaking the truth and was speaking from the bottom of his heart. He wanted Zhang Guo to make a name for himself in a single battle, so he had to take the risk. Now that the risk had appeared, the current reality was the reward for failing to take the risk. I wonder if Marshal Han has anything to say to Baogua by coming personally and waiting here, asked Fu Baogua. Since he saw Han Sanhe standing here, he had guessed Han Sanhe's intention almost immediately. However, it was because he knew that his respect and admiration for Han Sanhe had involuntarily increased. This was an extremely terrifying enemy, but he was also an opponent worthy of anyone's respect. Han Sanhe smiled and said, this old and useless one is waiting here, of course, to talk to Marshal Fu. As the saying goes, it's difficult to have a bosom friend, but it's difficult to have an enemy. Please enlighten me, Marshal Han, Fu Baogua said respectfully, completely ignoring the sarcasm in Han Sanhe's words. Han Sanhe turned to look at his Dongxian troop. Of course, he would not miss the concerned gazes directed at him. He could not help feeling a pang in his heart as he turned back and said, I believe Marshal Fu can already tell that after today's battle, Dongxuan's morale has been greatly damaged, but Yutong has lost its natural barrier as well. The unbreakable reputation of the eastern border no longer exists. If we continue to fight, it'll be a devastating scene. I believe that neither of us will be happy to see this. Fu Baogua said calmly, yes, Marshal Han is right. However, Yutong's warriors have long disregarded life and death. Our only thought is to protect our home and country. At most, we'll perish together, that's all. Although Fu Baoguo's tone was calm, everyone could hear the determination in his words that he would not hesitate to fight. Han Sanhe's tone was still calm and steady. Our army has been defeated in today's battle, this is a fact. However, I've already regrouped my troops and formed a combat force. If we continue to fight, I'm still confident that both sides will perish together. This is the outcome that Marshal Fu has in mind. However, is Marshal Fu really happy to see this? Now that Dongxian had been defeated, it was a huge loss. There were less than 300,000 soldiers left and their morale and confidence had dropped to the freezing point. The only reason they could still assemble into an army was because of Han Sanhe's prestige. Yutong was not having an easy time either. The number of people they had left was far less than Dongxuan's and they had expended a great deal of their energy. Morale was important, but they still needed sufficient physical strength and the support of a comprehensive military force. If the battle were to continue and Dongxian was reduced to a wailing army, the outcome would be hard to predict. Even the best outcome for Yutong would be for both sides to perish together. Reality was cruel. It was impossible for Han Sanhe to win and regain the overwhelming advantage he once had, but he knew that it was impossible. However, it was entirely possible for both sides to perish together. Han Sanhe's words were not empty talk. Fu Baoguo was well aware of this. After a moment of silence, he said, "Marshal Han, you've seen it clearly. However, it's meaningless to do so. It'll only increase the losses of both countries." Han Sanhe said, "That's why this old and useless one is waiting here, planning to have a good talk with Marshal Fu. Why don't both countries call a truce now and leave everything for the future? What do you think?" Fu Baoguo said calmly, "I'm listening. Even if it's a truce, there should be details of it, shouldn't there?" Han Sanhe said, "The current situation is unusual, let's skip over the details. Our men will retreat to the original border of both countries. The Fortress of Resilience will still belong to Yutong. I believe Marshal Fu understands that after Dongxuan's army retreats, they won't be able to attack Yutong for the time being. Both sides can, at least 10 years of breathing time. Isn't Marshal Han thinking too much? Our army has already gained the upper hand and the initiative now. Most importantly, Marshal Han needs to understand that as long as the 9 Supreme's lords show up once more, they can crush the remaining fighting spirit of Dongxuan's 300,000 soldiers. Under such circumstances, we can pursue them with our victory and chase them all the way to Dongxuan's gates, or even march straight in." Chapter 5:17. Han Sanhe chuckled in amusement. Looking at Fu Baoguo with a smile, he said faintly, "This old man understands as well as Marshal Fu that such a situation will never happen again. Why must Marshal Fu set up an empty fort in front of this old man? Aren't you afraid that this old man will drag Yutong's army down with him in a fit of rage?" Fu Baoguo could not help but blush as he forced himself to say, "Marshal Han, what do you mean by that?" Han Sanhe said, "If the 9 Supremes still had the strength to strike, the commotion just now wouldn't have ended there, nor would it have lasted for such a short period of time. If the 9 Supremes still had the strength to strike, how could they have given me the chance to reorganize my army? Marshal Fu, about the 9 Supremes, let's not bring it up again." What Han Sanhe said was what Fu Baoguo was most worried about. Hearing that Han Sanhe had seen through his thoughts, Fu Baoguo's expression changed slightly before he said, "Marshal Han, you've seen through everything. You're a schemer indeed, your foresight is like a torch. However, according to Marshal Han, are we just going to end this peacefully? Even if Yutong is invaded for no reason and the counterattack is successful, there's no price to pay, is there? If that's the case, does that mean that Yutong's people deserve it? Furthermore, how can I be sure that Marshal Han's promise is true? These days, even the credence of peace can be disregarded. Is a promise really useful? Towards the end, Fu Baoguo's tone was laced with sarcasm, pointing directly at the credence of peace that Han Sanhe had issued and the matter of him breaking the promise. Han Sanhe blushed as well, pausing for a moment before he said, although a promise can be broken due to one's position, some things should still be kept as a guarantee. As long as Marshal Fu agrees to let Dongxuan's 300,000 men leave safely, I, Han Sanhe, am willing to commit suicide here and now, using my life to answer to Yutang. Can this old man's life make up for the so-called broken promise? Han Sanhe's voice was suddenly louder, loud enough for Dongxuan's people to hear. Behind him, Zhang Gu and the others were enraged. Marshal, you mustn't. Teacher, you mustn't. We haven't lost yet. We'd rather die than make such a compromise. Han Sanhe turned around abruptly and said sternly, I'm not dead yet, all of you shut up. His sharp gaze swept across the crowd and he said angrily, don't you know what the situation is right now? Only if all of you survive can Dongxian be preserved. If all of you were to die here, what's the use other than a moment of bravery? I, Han Sanhe, am already 70 years old. How many more years can I live even if I'm on my last legs? I've killed countless people in my life, and the number of innocent souls that have died under my orders is in the tens of millions. If I were to pay for it with my body today, it would be a wonderful story. Exchanging my life for the safe return of 300,000 good men, what do I, Han Sanhe, have to regret? I have already made up my mind. No one is allowed to dissuade me on this matter. Anyone who dissuades me will be dealt with according to military law. I, Han Sanhe, don't wish to behead my comrade before I die. Han Sanhe turned resolutely after he finished speaking, not sparing Dongxian another glance. Naturally, he could not see the Dongxian soldiers behind him, all of them tearing up, unable to make a sound. Han Sanhe turned to face Fu Baoguo again and said calmly, this old man only has this one request, and it's also the biggest price I can pay right now. I wonder if Marshal Fu can fulfill this old man's wish? Han Sanhe did not use the word, can you promise, but, can you fulfill? Although it was only a difference of one word, the meaning behind it was thought-provoking. Fu Baoguo understood Han Sanhe's good intentions at once and could not help sighing. This renowned marshal who had dominated the continent for decades, an invincible marshal who had paved his path to God of War with mountains of corpses and seas of blood, had finally come to this step. Marshal Han, Fu Baoguo sighed, I understand and understand. I am willing to fulfill your wish. He sucked in a breath and said, Marshal Han, as Tianquan's God of War, you didn't lose to Yutang. You lost to Dongxian, not on the battlefield, but under Dongxuan's layers of restraint. Therefore, your loss doesn't involve the battlefield, you're still the undefeated God of War. The only thing I can do is to fulfill your last wish. Han Sanhe stared at Fu Baoguo and said softly, Marshal Fu, it's better if you don't agree so readily. This is a serious matter, and as the person directly involved, you bear the greatest responsibility. Do you think you can shoulder this responsibility? Fu Baoguo smiled and said, I know about this, of course. However, I don't want to see Marshal Han's ending be too bleak. As a fellow militant, this is the last respect I can give to Marshal Han, to the continent's God of War. Although we're enemies and we stand on opposing sides, I, Fu Baoguo, am determined to shoulder this. Fu Baoguo's smile was sincere and filled with regret. Han Sanhe stared at him and finally sighed, Fu Baoguo, what a talent you are. As a general, daring to take responsibility for what you've done is courage, being decisive in battle is charisma, strategizing is strategy, being clear-minded is wisdom, knowing when to advance or retreat is the way to conduct oneself. Fu Baoguo, you're considered a well-rounded talent. Fu Baoguo replied calmly, Marshal Han, you flatter me. Han Sanhe sighed softly and suddenly turned to look at Yun Yang, saying softly, Young Master Yun, if anything happens in the future, I hope that young Master Yun can take care of the Han family a little. Yun Yang was taken aback and said, I don't quite understand Marshal Han's words. Yun Yang was not pretending to be knowledgeable. Han Sanhe was Dongxuan's man after all. Was what he had just said a last-minute request? But, was it possible to do so? It was impossible. Han Sanhe smiled faintly and said, Young Master Yun doesn't need to understand. Just remember this old man's request. Everything will be clear in the future. Yun Yang frowned and said in deep thought, if so, I'll agree to it. Han Sanhe chuckled and said, Young Master Yun is a noble descendant of heaven. There is no one in this world who can be more blessed than young Master Yun. Since I've agreed to it, it's even more so to show my righteousness. This old man has nothing else to worry about. I have no regrets after this. He cupped his fists and bowed solemnly. Thank you, Marshal Fu. Thank you, young Master Yun, for fulfilling my wish. Before his words echoed in the air, Han Sanhe took a few steps back and turned abruptly. Looking at the worried Dongxian soldiers who were about to dash out, Han Sanhe said loudly, pass down my order. Yes, sir. Retreat immediately. Don't stop along the way. Head straight for the capital. This war ends here. This order takes effect immediately. Once he finished speaking, he drew his sword with a clang, his resolve clear. Teacher. Zhang Gu was shocked, no longer caring about the military order as he sprinted forward like his life depended on it. The clouds in the sky changed colors as the cold wind howled. Han Sanhe's robes fluttered in the wind as if they were about to be blown away by the wind. He waved his hand lightly, but Zhang Gu stopped in his tracks as if he had been struck by lightning. Tears streamed down his face as he cried out sorrowfully, Teacher. Han Sanhe smiled faintly and recited softly, a lifetime of battles between heaven and earth, a command like a mountain chills the bones of the dead, a year of hunger on the battlefield swallowing snow, unable to return to my homeland even after 10 years, a lifetime of settling the affairs of an emperor, a grand ambition to unite the land. As he recited, he suddenly chuckled sadly and murmured, I can bear to cook the hounds. When the hares are dead, I have no regrets when the birds are dead, I only lament that before the grand ambition is fulfilled, the heart of the emperor and his officials is already cold. I've marched thousands of miles out of the desert, donned 1,000,000 armors and fought fiercely, the demons and monsters have been wiped out, the mountains and rivers can be seen from now on. It's hard to look back on my 7-foot body. This old man's tears are speechless. Today, I repay the world with my life, I'll let my corpse return on horseback. Han Sanhe heaved a long sigh and said sternly, Your Majesty. Before he could finish his words, he did not continue. The sword light flashed and blood appeared immediately. Blood gushed out from his neck like a fountain, dyeing the mountains and rivers red. Han Sanhe stood tall with his sword in one hand, unmoving as the two armies clashed against each other. He did not move. The god of war of a generation had left the underworld in this lifetime. Teacher, Zhang Gu howled in pain, suddenly falling to his knees on the ground as if he had lost his soul, tears and snot streaming down his face. Marshal. A deafening cry came from Dongxuan's formation, countless men in the army weeping like rain. Yun Yang and Fu Baoguo could not help sighing inwardly as they looked at Han Sanhe's body that was inches away from them. Han Sanhe was still standing tall despite the fact that his breath had stopped and his life had left his body. His expression was still indifferent, his eyes still looking forward as if he was stroking his beard with a smile. The sword in his right hand gleamed coldly, stained with blood. However, the feeling it gave was still that of the god of war of a generation giving orders from the marshal's tent. Chapter 5:18. These few days, I only wrote 500 words a day, 1,000 words a day, and sometimes 2,000 to 3,000 words. I've saved up these chapters and I'll publish them all today. Let's enjoy ourselves first. Let's talk about tomorrow. Thank you for your patience and company. Feng Ling is deeply grateful. These days, I think, should be a period of time that I will never forget for the rest of my life. Especially after the surgery, the days when I was blindfolded, it was the most memorable. Just looking at it with one eye, even the phone screen looked blurry. Talking and laughing every day, my heart was anxious, it wasn't easy to remove it, and when I looked at it, my vision was so clear. Don't worry. In the beginning, when the doctor said it was serious, I was also panicking. Ever since I started writing, it has been 10 years, and I have never stopped writing for such a long time. Sometimes, I would let my imagination run wild, thinking that when Master Xing retired, everyone would say that they owed him a movie ticket. If I, Feng Ling, was really blind, and had no choice but to retire from this industry, who knows how many people would still remember that they once owed an author a subscription fee? Luckily, no one. After not writing for more than 20 days, I'm back. Since I'm back, I'll continue to work hard and do my own thing. During this period of time, my brothers and sisters have been worrying about me, supporting me, and the managers have all sent screenshots to me. Some asked anxiously, some directly went to the hospital from thousands of miles away, and many brothers and sisters sent nourishment products. To be able to meet all of you in this life, it's my great happiness. How can I give up this happiness so easily? I've also thought that since I have 7 or 8 chapters in stock, I might as well slowly publish it and rest more, but thinking about it, everyone is so good to me, why should I hold on to it? I might as well publish it all and let everyone enjoy it. I'll talk about the future in the future. In short, I'm back. My eyes haven't recovered yet, and in the next 3 to 6 months, I'll try to avoid washing my face. I can't drink or eat spicy food. I'll take note. Maybe after today's explosion, there will be fewer updates in the future. But I'll try my best to write. When the time comes, I hope everyone can understand and understand. Thank you. My dear brothers and sisters, it's so good to stand side by side with all of you in this world again. Chapter 519. Dongshuan's cries were deafening. Fu Baogua and Yunyang bowed respectfully at Han Sanhe's body that was still standing upright and retreated slowly. This continent's god of war had spent his entire life fighting the world and had caused immense pain to Yutong's people. However, they had different standpoints and had practiced war, they served their own masters, there was no right or wrong. Whether it was Yunyang or Fu Baogua, they had to acknowledge this man's lifetime of achievements with a sense of melancholy. No matter what, this was a qualified soldier. A qualified marshal. Rest in peace. Yunyang said softly, if there's a next life, we shall fight again. Fu Baogua heaved a long sigh. Her gaze towards Yunyang was filled with gentleness. No matter what, there were not many people who could understand a pure military man like Han Sanhe. Yunyang's words were not only an acknowledgement of Han Sanhe, but also the greatest understanding of the continent's militants. If there was a next life, they would fight again. Fu Baogua. Zhang Gu hollered, jumping up like a madman, his eyes bloodshot. It's you who forced my teacher to his death. Do you want to leave just like that? Fu Baogua stood still and turned to speak coldly, you and I both know the reason for Marshal Han's death and we are well aware of it. Zhang Gu, I know you're upset, but if you intend to go against Marshal Han's dying wish and insist on fighting, Fu Baogua, and 200,000 Yutong men will fight with you. There's no need to use such a lame excuse. Zhang Gu trembled when he heard him, glaring at Fu Baogua as if he wanted to devour him. After a long time, his gaze returned to Han Sanhe. After a long, long time, Zhang Gu roared, yes, Marshal. Retreat. Dongshuan's army, retreat. As soon as he finished, Zhang Gu spat a mouthful of blood. His muscular body fell to the ground, facing the sky. After that, Dongxuan's army only stayed for half a day before they began to retreat slowly. When they retreated, the entire army was already dressed in plain mourning, white banners covering the sky. All the soldiers were silently shedding tears as they quietly walked back. The gloomy atmosphere along the way was startling to see. No one could doubt what kind of astonishing emotions were brewing in the chest cavity of this kind of troop, but they were forcefully suppressing them to not erupt. Before they left, all the Dongxian soldiers turned to look in Yutong's direction. Their wolf-like gazes made one's heart sink. Despite the high morale of Yutong's soldiers, they were inexplicably shocked. No matter what, Dongxuan's troops had retreated. The battle of the century between Yutong and Dongxian had finally come to an end. Yutong had won after all. We won. We won. All of Yutong's soldiers cheered. For a moment, the ecstatic cheers shook the clouds. Yunyang and Fu Baogua stood side by side on their horses, watching Dongxuan's army that was slowly leaving and getting further away. There was no trace of joy on their faces. Even when they heard the deafening cheers of their own soldiers, they remained silent. It wasn't that the two of them didn't feel relaxed, but at the same time, they also felt an indescribable melancholy. The god of war had fallen just like that. He had committed suicide in front of two armies. He had used his life in exchange for the safe return of 200,000 to 300,000 soldiers and the continuation of the Han family's glory. He had even used his death to preserve a large amount of energy for Dongxian and a buffer time that was sufficient for them to recuperate. Furthermore, the ruler had obtained the space to expand his regime without any hindrance. Just like what Fu Baogua had said, Han Sanhe had not lost to Yutong nor to the Nine Supremes. He had only lost to Dongxuan's imperial court. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that his way home was on the battlefield, and he wouldn't be trampled by those political clowns. I didn't expect the god of war to end like this. Fu Baogua's mood was downcast. As an enemy, Han Sanhe was undoubtedly the person he hated the most. This was because the damage this person had done to Yutong and to the continent's situation had almost reached a height that was unparalleled throughout the ages. However, from a military standpoint, Han Sanhe was also the person Fu Baogua admired the most. Throughout the 5,000 years of Tianquan's militarism, Han Sanhe's achievements in military affairs could only be described with 8 words: unprecedented and unparalleled. An absolute god of war. Unshakable and unparalleled, unprecedented and unparalleled. Yunyang sighed faintly and said, "Actually, Marshal Fu might not have noticed that there was a deeper meaning behind Han Sanhe's expedition this time. Perhaps he never planned to return from the beginning. Whether he won or lost this war, whether he lived or died, Han Sanhe had already decided not to return to Dongxian." Fu Baogua thought about Yunyang's sudden statement for a long time and said, "I understand half of it. As for the other half, please enlighten me, young Master Yun." Yunyang said, "Perhaps Han Sanhe didn't think that he would die when he first deployed his troops. On one hand, he wanted to nurture his domestic forces and ensure that there would be no gaps in Dongxuan's military higher-ups. On the other hand, he wanted to conquer half of Yutong as his backyard and his biggest political leverage. The purpose of this can be said to be obvious. As long as he succeeds, even if he survives, as long as he has half of Yutong in his hands, Han Sanhe will have no worries even if he has to face the whole of Dongxian. On the other hand, if he fails, there's no way out. There's really no need for him to continue living. It's just a matter of dying earlier or later." Yunyang analyzed calmly, "According to our intelligence, Han Sanhe's situation in the nation of Dongxian isn't looking good. He's basically surrounded by enemies on all sides. Furthermore, he's used this war and the pressure of the nation's righteousness to send all the private armed forces of Dongxuan's aristocratic families into the battlefield. Han Sanhe's ruthlessness doesn't stop there. His true cruelty lies in the fact that he's conscripted all these armed forces and sent them all to the Fortress of Resilience. There's a total of 700,000 of them. During this period of time, Dongxian has attacked the Fortress of Resilience with all its might, regardless of the cost and casualties. Actually, Marshal Fu, what you're facing are only the private troops commanded by Han Sanhe, not Han Sanhe's elite troops. There's a decisive difference between the two. Yunyang said faintly. Han Sanhe has actually cooperated with you, Marshal Fu. It's all because of your intentional and unintentional cooperation that Dongxuan's malignant armed forces are sent to their graves. Almost 1 million private troops have been killed just like that. The nation of Dongxian is basically in peace now. Even if there's still some left, it won't affect the overall situation. As long as Dongxuan's emperor isn't a muddle-headed bastard. Therefore, Han Sanhe's greatest contribution, the one that's least acknowledged, is here. Fu Baoguo was hit with a sudden realization. I see. After a while, he murmured, no wonder, no wonder. When I evaluated the combat power of both sides, the conclusion I came up with was that I could only hold on for a while before Han Sanhe broke through. However, the truth is far more optimistic than my estimation. I've held on for more than twice the amount of time. If not for this extra buffer time, Yutong's chances of losing this war would have increased by at least 50%. I've thought of many things before this. I've thought about the help of Marquis Yun, I've thought about the efforts of other reinforcements, but the only thing I didn't think about was Dongxuan's internal support. Life is like a game of chess indeed, the universe is unpredictable. Therefore, all of Dongxuan's nobles, including the royals, hate Han Sanhe to the core. If this war is lost, only death awaits Han Sanhe when he returns. He's already in an awkward situation where he can't advance or retreat. No matter if he advances or retreats, it's a path to hell. Furthermore, if Han Sanhe returns to Dongxian alive, Dongxuan's military will be suppressed to the point where they can't even lift their heads due to this defeat. For a long time to come, Dongxuan's military will be at an absolute disadvantage in the imperial court. Militants are the worst at dealing with situations where they're in the wrong. They'll only be beaten up passively without any room to turn things around. If that happens, Dongxian will lose its god of war and its military power. How could it be fortunate that its military won't be able to recover? Even if the nobles see this, they won't give up on their own benefits. They've only ever had benefits in their eyes, there's no such thing as morality. If that happens, Dongxian will truly be finished. Yunyang said in admiration, but the situation now is completely different. Han Sanhe's dead. The source of Dongxuan's defeat and conflict has used his death to atone for his sins. He died for the lives of 300,000 soldiers and Dongxuan's national destiny. He used his death to turn the tables on this terrible situation. Han Sanhe's death has turned the nation's military into a mourning army. Mourning soldiers have always been extremely frenzied and difficult to defeat. There's a saying in the art of war that a mourning army is bound to win. It's never just a saying because such a troop dares to charge forward and risk their lives no matter what enemy they're facing. I dare say that even with the 9 Supremes' help, they might not be able to shake the 300,000 mourning soldiers. The 9 Supremes' greatest influence on the battlefield comes from their control of the heaven and earth's power. Ordinary people are extremely fearful of them, losing their will to fight the moment they encounter them. They only have the thought of running for their lives, but these 300,000 mourning soldiers have already surpassed an ordinary person's concept of life and death. They'll still die, but they're truly unafraid of death. Against such a troop, the 9 Supremes can hardly unleash their full potential. It's truly frightening and unshakable. Facing such mourning soldiers, no matter how strong the opposition in Dongxian is, as long as anyone or any force dares to step out and speak ill of Han Sanhe or impose any sort of punishment on the Han family, they'll be torn to shreds by Dongxuan's military regardless of the cost. Chapter 520. Yunyang looked at Fu Baogua. All in all, Marshal Fu, you're just a pure soldier, while Han Sanhe, other than being the most outstanding soldier, was also an extremely incisive politician. He could even make use of his own life and death so thoroughly. It's equally frightening and shocking. Fu Baogua chuckled dryly. How can I be as thorough as young Master Yun? The only thought that crossed my mind just now was that as a fellow soldier, and as such a respectable military legend, I must help you. Even if I have to bear the blame, I must do it. He turned to stare into Yun Yang's eyes and said, I will personally report this matter to His Majesty. I will not shirk my responsibility. Yun Yang smiled and said, Marshal Fu, are you afraid that I'll snitch on you to His Majesty? Han Sanhe's calling me a descendant of nobility just now has such an effect. It has subtly driven a wedge between Marshal Fu and me. Marshal Fu has never seen eye to eye with me. Now that I have the identity of a royal relative, my stance is even more subtle. Am I right? Fu Baogua felt awkward and said, I didn't mean that, I really didn't mean that. Young Master Yun, you're thinking too much. Yun Yang laughed heartily and lowered his voice to say, Marshal Fu, regarding this matter, I think it's best to end it here. In this world, probably only you, I, and heaven and earth know about this subtlety. Dongxuan's military hates you to the core. No matter what, you're the one who forced Han Sanhe to his death on the surface. So, we don't have to create additional trouble for ourselves and trouble ourselves for nothing. Suddenly, Fu Baogua studied Yun Yang from head to toe seriously, as if he was getting to know Yun Yang all over again. Yun Yang wore an honest smile on his face. Marshal Fu, it's better not to leak some gossip and information if you can. You have to know that even the most enlightened monarch will be suspicious. No matter how fair and open the imperial court is, it's inevitable that there will be conflicts. Especially when it involves great benefits, there will be situations where one has no choice but to do it despite knowing that it shouldn't be done. Fu Baogua sighed softly. Yes, Yun Yang continued, as for me, I'm only a marquis's young master. Even if I have the royal bloodline, it's impossible for me to be acknowledged by the royal family in this lifetime. Naturally, it's impossible for me to participate in the division of that big cake. Actually, with my cultivation base level, ordinary worldly benefits are nothing to me. Isn't it too arrogant of me to say this? He. Fu Baogua could not help grinning as he said, of course, it's arrogant, but it's more practical. He pondered for a moment and said, if that's the case, then I'll keep this matter to myself. No one will believe me even if I tell them. Yun Yang understood and said, even so, I'll keep it to myself. By the way, when Marshal Fu returns to the capital to report on his work, you must treat me to a drink. Fu Baogua laughed heartily. No problem. I'll get someone to dig a huge pond and fill it with fine wine. Then, I'll prepare plenty of meat and let you stay there. I've long heard of young Master Yun's past reputation. I'm not afraid of your magnanimity. Yun Yang guffawed. The legendary debauchery? Then it's a deal. I won't go back on my word. Then, both of them turned and rode their horses back. The war has come to an end. Looking at the situation, I believe that Dongxian won't have any major military movements for at least 3 years. What plans do you have after this, Marshal Fu? Asked Yun Yang. I've promised Lord Supreme Cloud that I'll guard the Fortress of Resilience with my life. Fu Baogua said respectfully, although the original Fortress of Resilience has been destroyed, I plan to mobilize more manpower and strive to build a new fort that's a few times stronger than the previous one within these 2 years. There won't be any disturbances on the eastern border in the short term, so success is assured. The destruction of the Fortress of Resilience this time can be said to be complete. It's destroyed from its foundation, so it's convenient for me to start anew and rebuild it. Speaking of this, Fu Baogua looked excited. Even if war really breaks out 2 to 3 years later, the new fortress of resilience will definitely let Dongxian know that this is a tough bone that they can't even chew through. The world's strongest fort is still right in front of them. Yunyang said quietly, "Wrong." Fu Baoguo was stunned. "Wrong?" Yunyang said, "Marshal Fu's thinking is too conservative. The existence of the Fortress of Resilience in the past was to defend against Dongxian. This is understandable. It's because Dongxian has the world's top military force and the world's top marshal. Facing such a strong combination, it's only right to prioritize defense. However, from today onwards, Dongxian will have none of that. Especially after losing Han Sanhe's suppression, the civil and military infighting in Dongshuan's imperial court will be unprecedentedly intense." Yunyang said calmly, "Therefore, your rebuilding of the Fortress of Resilience with the intention of guarding the territory has already done more harm than good. The effect is extremely limited. I hope that Marshal Fu can turn the new Fortress of Resilience into a fortress that focuses on offense. From now on, Yutong will no longer be a country that can be bullied or invaded. The basic direction of our strategy will change, from defense to offense." Yunyang turned to look at Fu Baoguo and said with a smile, "Perhaps, the great undertaking of invading other countries, expanding our territory, and unifying the world will begin in 2 to 3 years. Marshal Fu, perhaps such a great undertaking will come from your hands." Yunyang beamed brightly. Completed. The more he thought about it, the brighter his eyes shone. Suddenly, he slapped his thigh and said, "That's right, why didn't I think of it?" Thanks to young master's reminder, Dongshuan's military force has shrunk greatly without Han Sanhe. What's there to be afraid of? Wait, I have to think about this again. How should the new Fortress of Resilience be built? I need to gather some talents who know how to build a fortress and brainstorm. Oh, this is absolutely great news. As he spoke and thought, he was exhilarated, wishing that he could start working on it right now. Yunyang looked at Fu Baoguo, who was grinning like a fool as he thought about the great achievements of expanding the territory. Yunyang could not help but smile. Fu Baoguo did not look like the top-notch marshal that Han Sanhe had described him to be. He looked like a silly boy. Fu Baoguo, who was being stared at by Yunyang, only snapped out of his daze after he had been grinning like a fool for a long time. Feeling embarrassed, he asked with a straight face, "Why are you here?" Yunyang was stunned. Why am I here? That's right. Why am I here?" Fu Baoguo retorted angrily, "Shouldn't you be escorting old Marshal back to the capital now? Why are you on the battlefield? Yunyang, how should you be punished for leaving your post without permission?" Yunyang was shocked by the accusation. "Marshal Fu, your teacher isn't actually old Grand Commandant Fang, is he? Your teacher should be old Marshal Qiu Jianhan. This kind of hooligan method of burning the bridge after crossing the river and putting the blame on someone else is simply at the pinnacle of perfection. You can do whatever you want as you please. Bah, it should be said as you like. Just open your mouth. Do you dare to be any more shameless?" Fu Baoguo was relentless. "I'm talking about military duty with you now. Your current responsibility and the position you're supposed to be in aren't here. Why are you making a false accusation? Tell me, where's old Marshal Qiu? He wouldn't be nearby, would he?" Yunyang was helpless. "Of course not. He should be 3,000 miles away now. You bastard." Fu Baoguo scolded him unceremoniously. "Still spouting nonsense here? Aren't you going to chase after him to protect him? Do you still want to earn battle merits? Are you one of my soldiers?" Yunyang was fuming, wishing that he could reveal his identity as Supreme Cloud and beat this fellow up. He could not help but curse inwardly, "I've helped you deal with a 1,000,000-strong army, helped you win this battle, and even given you so many good ideas and painted such a beautiful future. I didn't expect you to be born in the year of the dog, biting me as soon as you turn around. Not only is he born in the year of the King dog, he's a typical mad dog. Can't you be more of a hooligan? Yun Yang had obviously overlooked an important point. Although Qiu Jianhan was the head of the capital city's top 3 rogues and was the most reputable, the more a dog bit, the less it barked. For example, old Grand Commandant Fang Qingtian, who was also one of the top 3 rogues, and his successor, Fu Baogua. In front of Supreme Cloud, Fu Baogua could only feel inferior and allow the latter to say whatever he wanted. However, the person in question was Yun Yang, and now that the conflict had calmed down, when else would he be waiting for Yun Yang? So what if he was handsome? I'll rush over right away. Yun Yang was full of complaints as he said angrily, "Goodbye, sir. No, it's best if we don't meet again. Hold on, I've already promised to make you a place of debauchery. How can we not meet again? Oh, this horse of yours is not bad. Why don't you leave it with me?" Fu Baogua's eyes shone. "Where's your shame? Can you be any more shameless than that?" Yun Yang's face was dark as he cursed unabashedly with his red teeth. Then, he clamped his legs on the horse's abdomen. Reddy looked at Fu Baogua in disdain and snorted, snorting all over Fu Baogua's face before it left like a gust of wind. Ck me. Why is this beast so fierce? Fu Baogua wiped his face hastily. Then, he sighed. So many good brothers, gone just like that. After chasing Yun Yang away, Fu Baogua stood alone on the battlefield. Suddenly, sorrow welled up in his heart as tears gushed out like a fountain. Prostrating himself on the horse, he covered his face with both hands and wept in a repressed manner. There was really no image left to speak of. My brothers, when there was no one around, Fu Baogua was shaking like a child as he cried. Who said that a man does not shed tears easily? It was only because he had yet to be heartbroken. On the battlefield, the setting sun shone through the thick layers of clouds. A man and a horse drew long shadows on the pure white snowy ground that was dyed red by fresh blood. When he was sure that there were no outsiders, the marshal suppressed sobs and indescribable sorrow finally erupted. Chapter 521. The sky gradually darkened. The battlefield was then engulfed in the boundless night. High up in the sky, a pair of doubtful eyes were hidden in the clouds, looking down at the scene below, but it was filled with an inexplicable feeling. Supreme Cloud, who is he? Listening to this, it seems like Han Sanhe has a suspect. Could it be that there are clues related to this in Dongxian? This Yun Yang, he's obviously not Supreme Cloud. He's too young. Especially when he was under surveillance the entire time. From the moment he entered the battlefield, he was ordered around by the marshals and generals. There's nothing suspicious about him at all. Most importantly, when he entered the battlefield, the 9 Supremes attacked at the same time. Yun Yang can't be Supreme Cloud then. Then, who is Supreme Cloud? It's a pity that Han Sanhe died too soon. A clue related to the 9 Supremes was cut off just as soon as it appeared. What fate, the person in the clouds was mumbling to himself. Suddenly, 8 dazzling rays of light fell from the sky like stars, like meteorites falling to the ground. In just an instant, the 8 rays of light pierced through the clouds and landed on the ground almost at the same time. The entire land suddenly fell into a peculiar state of undulating up and down. It was as if many huge earth dragons were rolling and moving under the ground. The 8 colors of red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, purple, and black constantly flickered on the ground. After a while, they disappeared abruptly. The power of the 9 Supremes. The person in the sky suddenly opened his eyes wide, his eyes filled with astonishment and astonishment. 8 of the 9 Supremes are really dead. This is... Thinking about it, the frustration in the man's heart rose to its peak, almost crushing his own head into smithereens. I see. So this is the truth. It was the spiritual restraining formation that prevented the 9 Supremes from unleashing their powers, but the powers of the manifestations didn't dissipate. Instead, they were sealed in Tianxian Cliff, and the so-called reappearance of the 9 Supremes this time is actually caused by the release of those powers. No wonder the powers are like trees without roots, unable to persist for long despite being powerful. This is the truth. As for the strange light now, should it be the final bloom of the 9 Supremes' power, or what? Why would 8 different types of lights suddenly descend upon this land? This piece of land, there's clearly no longer any signs of life within 1,000 miles. What the hell is going on? Is it just fate, or is there something else? What are your plans? Yunyang found the 12 children in the Steel Cavalry's camp. But now, there were only 8 left. The faces of the 8 of them were filled with sorrow. However, his expression was filled with determination. If you want to go home, I can make the decision to let you leave. Yunyang said. The 8 slightly immature faces hesitated for a moment. We want to take a leave of absence. Send our brothers' bodies back first, then come back to the Fortress of Resilience. Why? Yunyang frowned. 4 men have been lost in one battle. Aren't you all afraid? Don't you care? He was in a dilemma. These little fellows were so determined. How was he going to explain this to their families? How could it be so fun to join the army to fight a war? The leader of the children was called Li Erden. After joining the army, he had given himself a name, Li Zhan. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Teacher, we know that it doesn't bode well if we stay here, but we're even more unwilling to go back just like this. Firstly, we still have to avenge our 4 brothers. Secondly, we like this atmosphere, we like the battlefield, we like the military camp. Thirdly," he stuttered and snuck a peek at Yunyang's expression, saying, "staying here, although it's cruel, although we have to face life and death at all times, come out, whether it's cruel or tragic, we've seen the outside world after all." Yunyang understood it all at once. It was true. Coming out of a small, isolated village, it was fine if they could not see the vast world, spending the rest of their lives peacefully in a small valley. However, once these hot-blooded youths had seen the outside world, how could they be willing to return to the isolated village and spend the rest of their lives in silence? Yunyang was silent for a moment before he said, "If you all want a place to live, you can follow me back to the capital. I'll be watching over you there. It's much better than staying here." The 8 children were silent for a moment. Yunyang could feel the resistance in the silence. It was a resistance of pride. "We want to work our way out with our own strength," Li Zhan said softly. "Ambitious," Yunyang said approvingly. The 8 youths blushed together. Yunyang took out a mystical qi cultivation manual that he had prepared earlier and explained it in detail. He then watched as the 8 children practiced. "No matter where you all stay," Yunyang said in a low voice, "never forget where your roots are. Do you understand?" "Yes." The 8 youths' eyes shone brightly. "No matter where you are, no matter what achievements you have in the future, never forget the comrades and brothers who have fought alongside you, never forget the comrades and brothers who have sacrificed themselves by your side. Do you understand? Don't ever forget their families. Never forget, as a man, the responsibility towards his friends, parents, family, country, and the relatives of his comrades who have sacrificed themselves," Yunyang said in a low voice. His gaze was hollow. Wang Dinghua watched quietly from the side. When Yunyang said all this, he could clearly feel the sincerity and sense of responsibility that was almost overflowing from him. The weight of each word was as heavy as a mountain. He could not help but look solemn as well. "We will remember teacher's teachings." The 8 youths knelt on the ground at the same time and kowtowed. Wang Dinghua. Yunyang turned and said, "Take good care of them, but they don't need special care. Do you understand? It was a contradictory sentence. However, Wang Dinghua understood once he heard it. He said seriously, "Don't worry, young Master Yun. Old Wang understands." Yunyang nodded and took out a few banknotes from his pocket. "Send them back home." The youths were about to decline when Yunyang glared at them. "The brothers who have sacrificed themselves are not going to eat at home?" He shoved them over forcefully. The 8 youths' voices were choked. Those were 500,000 taels worth of banknotes. Even Wang Dinghua, who was watching from the side, was envious. However, Wang Dinghua had made up his mind. No matter what, he had to send these children back. This money belonged only to the small village. No one could touch it. Yunyang left. He felt a little relieved but also a little disappointed. Working hard by themselves, starting from scratch. The dreams of the youths were always so naive, filled with passion. Yunyang did not object to it. He would let them work on their own. Perhaps one day, they would become the new legend of starting from scratch. Who could say for sure? However, Yunyang did not wish for them to realize the importance of relationships, connections, society, human relations. One day and extinguish their passion to work hard before going to the capital city to look for him. Yunyang did not wish to see that. No matter what, the path of life was always one's own choice. At a certain stage, at a certain fork in the road, the left and right sides would lead to heaven and hell respectively. However, the entrance would be the same. Some would choose heaven, but some would go to hell if they made the wrong choice. In spite of this, there was still the possibility of falling to hell in heaven. There was also a path to heaven in hell. Bless you all. Never change your original intentions in this life, never forget your original intentions. This blessing was etched in Yunyang's heart. The 8 youths watched their teacher gallop away into the night, their eyes filled with respect and gratitude. The purple robe would forever remain in the depths of their hearts. "Teacher, you must take care." The 8 youths knelt down silently. Facing the faraway land where the figure had disappeared, they kowtowed silently. "Rise, children." Wang Dinghua sighed inwardly. "You will see your teacher again in the future." Yunyang, who was already far away and nearing the boundary of Tianxian Cliff, galloped across the snowy plains like a red shadow. However, just as he passed by Tianxian Cliff's boundary, he suddenly heard a loud boom. Yunyang looked up in shock. The 9 Supremes' temples that stood tall on Tianxian Cliff suddenly collapsed without any warning, turning into fine rubble that littered the ground in an instant. "No!" Yunyang cried out instinctively. Then, he was dumbstruck, his eyes wide as he screamed, "Why?" It was at this moment that an inexplicable force suddenly surged out from the ground. In less than a tenth of a blink of an eye, it quietly melted into Yunyang's body, meridians, and dantian. The entire process was simply faster than a bolt of lightning, and it only took the blink of an eye for it to come to an end. It was like a clay ox entering the sea, and there was no further movement. Yunyang jolted abruptly. It was a familiar force that had fused with him. It was a feeling that only existed when his brothers were together. Brothers. Yunyang felt an insuppressible wave of sorrow, but he understood what had happened instantly. He had used his identity as Supreme Cloud to trigger the manifestation power of the 9 Supremes that his brothers had left behind. His brother's dying wish, or rather, everyone's hope of merging the 9 Supremes into one, had all been poured into him. After he had triggered this force, he had also triggered his brother's dying wills that had been sealed together. Previously, when the 9 Supremes' power had struck Dongxuan's army, it had only lasted for a short period of time. It was not that the 9 Supremes' power had stopped there, but the remnant wills of the 9 Supremes had retained most of their power and followed him here. In other words, Although Yun Yang was still unable to use any of the Nine Supremes' cultivation methods or abilities, he was now truly one with the Nine Supremes. In the most thorough and extreme way, they had merged into one. Yun Yang, who was well aware of this, did not feel the slightest bit of joy. He lay on the horse's back, trembling as tears streamed down his cheeks. "Brothers, will I never be able to see you all again?" The merging of the Nine Supremes into one was the last wish of the deceased Nine Supremes, but it was also the situation that Yun Yang was most unwilling to see. This was because when the Nine Supremes' powers merged into one, it also meant that the original Nine Supremes' traces would be completely erased from this world from this moment onwards. The sky suddenly brightened in a way that it had never been before. On this unusually cold night, a curtain of light that was as bright as day appeared. The gloomy clouds that filled the sky dissipated without a trace in the blink of an eye, as if they had been hit by a hurricane that could destroy the world. The galaxy was bright, the moon was high in the sky. Yun Yang lifted his head to look at the starry sky. Looking at the countless twinkling stars in the sky, it was as if he could see Supreme Earth and the others' faces that he had not seen for a long time. They were smiling and blinking at him in the sky, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Yun Yang could not help the sorrow that welled up in his heart. In the sea of clouds, a man who was covered in chains leaned against a tree, looking at the sky and smiling faintly. "Not bad, not bad. This day has finally arrived. When the Nine Supremes return, the earth will split and the sky will be overturned, the martial world will be dominated by the Supremes. Mr. Nian, your good days are coming. As for me, Heaven's Inquisition. I'm finally going to be free. I've been trapped here all these years. I wonder what the outside world is like." Chapter 522. No matter how grief-stricken Yun Yang was, he still caught up to the retreating troops who were escorting Qiu Jianhan at dawn. Marquis Yun and Bai Yixue stood on the left and right, opening the way as they kept an eye on their surroundings with their powerful deific senses. The four noble young masters and the elites of the four families were in the middle, surrounding and protecting the old marshal. Therefore, their journey was extremely slow. Although they were a good distance ahead, Yun Yang still managed to catch up to them easily. "How is old Marshal now?" Yun Yang asked in a gentle tone. Yun Yang was very confident in his precious blood. He believed that the old Marshal's condition could only be better than before, not worse. He was merely asking casually. "How's the war?" Shengguan Lingxiu asked back impatiently. The war. Hearing that Yun Yang had rushed over, everyone gathered around to ask what was going on. "The war is over, we've won." Yun Yang said, "Han Sanhe is dead and Dongxian has begun to retreat." Ah, it was such a short and straightforward statement, but it left everyone dumbstruck. No matter how straightforward Yun Yang had said it, the simple war was over, they had won, the enemy's marshal was dead, and the enemy had retreated. It was extremely plain and unpretentious. However, to the crowd, this was great news that they did not even dare to think about. They could not help but be dazed for a moment. Their minds were blank, so silent that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Then, after the extreme silence came an extreme hubbub, the deafening cheers were deafening. There were also endless questions mixed in. Yun Yang knew how the crowd was feeling, so he explained everything patiently. After all, this was an irreplaceable piece of good news to Yutong's people. All along, Yutong's biggest enemy and biggest threat was Dongxian. With the continent's top general, Han Sanhe, and the Dongxian army, which was the most elite in the entire Tianxian continent, working together, they were an extreme threat. Now, Han Sanhe was dead. The continent's top general, Tianxuan's god of war, was dead. Simply put, the threat that Dongxian could pose was reduced by at least 80%. Hearing this great news, how could everyone not cheer and jump for joy? In spite of this, it was hard for them to imagine. They were clearly in a precarious situation in the war, otherwise, why would Fu Baoguo arrange for them to evacuate? Nominally, he had asked them to escort the old marshal back safely, but who did not know that the war was in a disadvantageous position and could no longer go on? How could they suddenly win and even kill the enemy's marshal? It sounded so unreal. If this had not come from Yun Yang's mouth, the crowd would have believed that Yun Yang would not joke about it. It was unbelievable and unimaginable. Actually, this is what happened. The 9 Supremes Lords suddenly showed up and the might of the 9 Supremes reappeared in the world. Dongxian was intimidated by the might of the 9 Supremes Lords, so how could they not be defeated? When Yun Yang uttered the words 9 Supremes, another round of loud cheers erupted from the crowd. Shangguan Lingxiu's bright eyes stared at Yun Yang even more intently, a hint of a smile flashing across her face. That was a top secret that only she knew. It was enough for her to be aware of it. In the end, Dongxuan's defeat was inevitable. To preserve the spark of Dongxuan's military, Han Sanhe willingly committed suicide to end this war. Dongxian then retreated. We've won this war, Yutong has won. When Yun Yang finished his narration, he saw that the crowd was filled with satisfaction and pride. Thank God. Yutong's crisis has finally been resolved. It was Marquis Yun who said this. Marquis Yun's face was filled with emotion and relief. Yun Yang realized that his cheapskate father's sideburns had already turned white without him noticing. No matter how outstanding his looks were, how heroic he looked, it could not hide the harsh pressure that he had been through. All these years, Yutong had been plagued by internal and external threats. His Majesty was not the only one in the royal family who was doing his best to deal with the situation. Marquis Yun, who was not in the imperial court, was also busy and exhausted. It could even be said that Yun Xiaoyao was more like a firefighter. If there was trouble in the east, he would go there; if there was trouble in the west, he would go to the west. The so-called Marquis of Heavenly Clouds was not involved in the imperial court, it was a smokescreen that did not live up to its name. Even when the world was at peace, he could not stay at home leisurely. He had to pay attention to the movements at the border at all times. Who knew what would happen there? He had to work on improving his capability. Only with this as a prerequisite could he have the capital to make friends with the martial world sects, get to know many martial world experts, and even guard against ace cultivators from opposing countries. All in all, other than the political affairs of the imperial court, he had to worry about everything else. Whatever happened, he had to take care of it. Heaven realm cultivators were humans too, they would get tired as well. If Han Sanhe was burdened by the reputation of being the continent's top general, Tianshuan's god of war, and did not have the chance to reach the pinnacle of his cultivation journey, Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao, was similarly troubled by external affairs. If he had cultivated wholeheartedly and not interfered with external affairs, his capability would not be as it was now. Fortunately, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief now. Now that I've returned to the capital, I'll have to rest for a while. It doesn't matter if I don't go out for a few years. Marquis Yun smiled tiredly, but there was satisfaction and longing in his smile. I can roam the world, but it's not as comfortable as resting at home. That is true peace, true stability. All these years, I'm really tired. Yun Yang thought of something and said, now that the war has collapsed, it's a good time for you to go back and have a good rest. I think there must be a lot of things in the capital that require you to manage the situation. Marquis Yun chuckled dryly. You still won't let me go. Are you going to arrange a new task for me? Yun Yang coughed and said, how would I dare? But think about it, His Majesty will be very upset if he sees you idling. Marquis Yun rolled his eyes and said, how would he dare? His words were spoken in a domineering manner. Throughout the entire empire of Yutong, only Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao, dared to speak in such a manner, in such a blatant manner. Whether it was Yun Yang, old Marshal Chiu, Marshal Ling Daoyin, or old Grand Commandant Fang, none of them would dare. Right, what have you done to old Marshal Chiu? Why hasn't he woken up yet? Marquis Yun suddenly asked Yun Yang, indirectly answering Yun Yang's initial question. Old Marshal's breathing is steady and his vitality is abundant. His physical condition has improved greatly and his pulse is smooth as well. He's in a state of deep sleep all this while. For days, there's no sign of him waking up. Marquis Yun did not wait for Yun Yang to reply and continued, I've observed and monitored him repeatedly. The reason why old Marshal hasn't woken up is probably due to the loss of his vitality and the excessive depletion of his soul. Such a loss requires a long period of recuperation. However, this is only my personal opinion. As for the actual situation, you, as the one who directly treated him, will have to make the judgment. Regardless, old Marshal's life is definitely preserved. Yun Yang nodded upon hearing his words. Previously, Yun Yang had used his precious blood to snatch away the life of the old Marshal by force. It had been a close shave, a fight against fate. However, as Marquis Yun had predicted, the old Marshal's vitality and soul had been severely damaged. Even though his current physical condition was as healthy as an ordinary person, he still needed a long period of recuperation. His current state of deep sleep was the best. It was only a matter of time before the old Marshal would wake up again. Yun Yang was quite satisfied with his current state and had no further countermeasures. Without Emmy, his precious blood was already Yun Yang's biggest trump card. This was the most he could do. Your judgment is correct. Old Marshal only needs to recuperate now. The war is over, let us depart immediately and return to Tiantang. Not only the old Marshal, everyone else needs to rest as well, said Yun Yang. Very well. Everyone was in a jubilant mood at this moment. The 800-mile express news of the victory was also on the way back to the place where it was reported at the first possible moment. Among the group, only Yun Yang and Marquis Yun had a slight frown on their faces, as if they were troubled. They were not excited by the news of victory. The group of people who were escorting the old Marshal back was made up of the Shengguan family of generals, the four noble families, the residents of Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, and old Marshal Chiu's personal guards. These people had high cultivation bases and abilities, but they were not good at foresight and planning ahead. Reminded by Yun Yang's words just now, Marquis Yun's heart that was filled with elation turned into an inexplicable heaviness. Currently, the siege of the four empires had been broken. It was basically the same as the world being at peace. The external threat had been removed, so Yutong could naturally return to a period of peaceful development and recuperation. However, it was precisely at this time that the situation might become more dangerous. This was because once the external threat had been removed, what was left was internal strife. Yutong's internal strife was inevitable. Even if the current emperor had recovered and was in his prime, many of the princes had already grown up. Now that the external threat had been removed, the problem that they had to face now was the appointment of a successor. This was a problem that could not be avoided. Especially when Yutong was about to face a long period of peace. His Majesty was in good health, and his cultivation was not weak either. It seemed that he could still rule for a few more decades, but could the princes wait that long? According to Marquis Yun's judgment, they definitely could not. Then, what they had to face was the change of Shao Wall. Chapter 523. Perhaps the invasion of the army would cause the people to be plunged into misery, or even annihilate the nation, but as long as it was not completely annihilated, Yutong's internal core would be more cohesive, and there would be a day when it would regain its glory. However, internal strife that originated from within would not only cause the people to be plunged into misery. Each time the imperial authority was shaken, it would cause a massive reshuffle in the nation. Even when the matter had come to an end, there would still be follow-up matters to follow up on. Now that the external factors were gone and Marquis Yun had returned to Yutong's capital, His Majesty the Emperor would never allow his brother to stay out of the matter and be truly free and unfettered. Do you want to rest and not care about anything? How could it be so easy? Do you think that you can be free and unfettered just because you're called Marquis of Heavenly Clouds, Yun Xiaoyao? How could it be so easy? Marquis Yun could already foresee the mountains that he would have to carry on his shoulders when he returned to the capital. Yun Yang's considerations were similar to Marquis Yun's, but Yun Yang had considered more than Marquis Yun. This was because Yun Yang knew a huge secret that Marquis Yun did not, the eldest royal grandson of Yutong's current royal family, the only son of his elder brother Supreme Earth and Supreme Water. Yu Qinkuan. This was a matter of great importance. In fact, Yun Yang did not pay much attention to the prince's fight for the throne. Whoever was disobedient, he would just kill them. Yun Yang's thoughts were as simple as that. With Yun Yang's current cultivation base, there was no one in the entire Yutong who could stop him from doing anything. That's right, anything. To Yun Yang, as long as he was his backing, his precious nephew's throne would be secured. It was unshakable, so there was no need for him to pay too much attention to it. What he was really concerned about was something else, old Dugu's revenge. He had to avenge this. He had to find the one with the surname Ouyang and target him. He had to return 10 or 100 times more of what old Dugu had suffered that day to that person. Other than that, there was a third matter, the Mai sect. Although his evaluation of the Mai sect had worsened due to the previous battle, he had made a vow to heaven, so he had to fulfill it no matter what. Since the Mai sect looked down on us and would rather break the vow to participate in the world hegemony, they had to bear the consequences. Let me spend some effort to help your Grandmaster clean up the sect. However, compared to the fourth matter, the first three seemed insignificant. The fourth matter was the one that had been on Yun Yang's mind. It had not been easy for him to incite the battle between the Bound of Universes Lei family and the Four Seasons Tower, but why had there been no news of Lei Dongtian after such a long time? What the hell was he doing? No more revenge? However, with Lei Dongtian's vengeful personality, how could he tolerate this? When he thought of Lei Dongtian, he could not help but think of another force, the Four Seasons Tower. The Four Seasons Tower had gone through so many upheavals and changes in personnel, as well as countless losses, but the Four Seasons Tower's foundation had not been damaged in the slightest. It had not even revealed much of its power. The mysterious person who had appeared after Mr. Nian was so powerful that Yun Yang still felt a lingering sense of fear when he thought about it. This was a testament to the mysterious person's ability. This was the thing that truly weighed on his mind, the thing that kept him awake at night. There were also other things, such as the structure of the Nine Heavens dictum, the four noble young masters, Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan, the seven-star lake that the old lady had mentioned, and the treasure maps. There were so many things that Yun Yang could not help but feel a headache. Of course, Yun Yang would never forget something very important. He had to nurse old Grand Commandant Fang's health when he returned to the capital this time. The empire's pillar must not crumble so easily. Especially now that the war was over, it was very likely that the old man would suddenly be unable to hold back his anger and pass away just like that. Since he had risked his life to save old Marshal Chiu, he might as well make old Grand Commandant Fang stay as well. It was better that the legend of the capital's three rogues continued. In short, time was of the essence. It did not truly relax even after the end of the Eastern Border War. Yun Yang frowned, his mind weighed heavily. Yun Yang's mind was heavy while Marquis Yun's was anxious. However, the ones who were filled with joy were the four noble young masters of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. The four fellows were in high spirits. Though they were all bruised and battered, they were all in the best spirits they had ever been. How many did you kill? 400 to 500 at least. What about you? I killed more than you, at least 1,000, I'm about the same, only more. I realize that continuous fighting is good for us. I've actually broken through again. I'm almost at the 8th peak now. I wouldn't even have dared to dream of such a cultivation base in the past. Me too, me too. The bottleneck is obviously loosening. If there's another war, I'll definitely break through. It's just that I don't know when there'll be another one like this. Motherf ****, can all of you stop discussing these questions? The one who said that was Qiu Yunsan, whose cultivation base had stagnated and showed no signs of breaking through. Why isn't if ***king moving at all here? Is God blind? Ha ha ha. I'm even happier hearing that you haven't broken through. How can God be blind? It's God that has eyes. Why is it only God that has eyes? It's God that has eyes. Otherwise, why would God bless the kind and not the scoundrels? Who the ***ck are you calling scoundrels? All of you are gloating over my misfortune. Do you have any shame? When Yun Yang came in, the 4 of them were laughing amongst themselves. No, to be precise, the 3 of them were laughing. Dong Tianlin, Xia Bingchuan, and Chun Wanfeng were beaming with delight while Qiu Yunsan was sulking. Congratulations, 4 brothers, Yun Yang said with a grin. Yun Yang said with a grin, the 4 of you have made a great contribution in this battle. At the very least, you have beheaded thousands of people. This is a real military achievement. If you report it, you will definitely be given the title of a general. As the eldest, I am honored as well. I shall congratulate the 4 generals first. Upon hearing Yun Yang's words, the 4 men's faces turned green, no longer showing the slightest hint of smugness. General? What general? Why are we going to be generals? What's this all about? Dong Tianlin asked in horror. I want to leave immediately. Who wants to be a general? Qiu Yunsan cried out in grief. Me too. Me too. This isn't a place for humans to live. There's even a fixed time to pee here. I'd rather die than stay here. Chun Wanfeng was so agitated that he was tearing up. Whoever wants to be a general can be one. I'm not going to be one. Xia Bingchuan looked aggrieved. Once I think about living like this every day, your father feels that death is better than living. I'd rather be chased out without contributing anything than live like this. Dong Tianlin said helplessly. Ha ha ha. Yun Yang guffawed. All right. Do you think I don't know what you're thinking? Just go on your way. Don't worry, I won't force you to enlist in the army anymore. Look at how scared you all are. How ***king useless. Yun Yang was genuinely happy. These 4 buffoons would always bring him joy that came from the bottom of their hearts. Really? Boss, are you serious? Qiu Yunsan looked at Yun Yang helplessly. But my uncle. Yun Yang shook his head and said with a smile, leave your uncle to me, your boss. Actually, none of you were as useless in this war as you've said. At the very least, you didn't run away even when you were in the most dangerous of situations. Instead, you did your best to protect old Marshal Qiu and fought on the front line. Everyone saw this with their own eyes. No one will ever think of you as the popinjays you used to be. Yun Yang said seriously, we're all brothers, we're straightforward with our words. I really understand what you're thinking. Although you've always called yourselves popinjays, for brothers, all of you are great. It's my honor to have brothers like you all. The 4 of them were stunned when they heard him, suddenly lowering their heads in silence. Dong Tianlin chuckled humorlessly with his head hanging low. I didn't expect that in boss eyes, we're all great and even feel honored. You've overestimated us, Yun Yang chuckled and said, I know what you're thinking, but when you broaden your horizons, you'll realize that a mere family's power is actually nothing. I believe that all of you will have something much more powerful than this so-called family power that you value so much now in the future. The crux now is, do you all want to have it? Do you all want to walk out from where you are now and work hard to accomplish it? That's all. Just like how, if you didn't participate in the Eastern War personally, can you imagine that you can really be so valiant and not weaker than any of the brave generals on the battlefield? After saying these words, the tent suddenly fell into a deathly silence. Yun Yang retreated quietly. Just like what Yun Yang had said, the four noble young masters were definitely not popinjays like they appeared to be. They might be slippery, cowardly, or they might have all sorts of flaws, but there was one thing that Yun Yang admired the most about them and was willing to get close to them. Their blood was still warm. Their hearts were still warm. They still had dreams. They had the spirit of brotherhood. If all of you can figure it out yourselves, then perhaps, I can give all of you a life that's completely different from the past. Yun Yang thought quietly in his heart, if all of you can't figure it out and don't want to walk out, then there's nothing I can do. I'll still give all of you the greatest assistance when you need it. I thought I wouldn't see anyone as a brother anymore. It turns out that there are still friends in this world that I acknowledge and are worthy of being close to. Chapter 524. In the other tent. This tent was tightly sealed and the entrance was heavily guarded, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. The battle was officially over. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rolan boiled 2 pots of water at once to clean themselves thoroughly before checking the wounds on their bodies. Throughout the series of battles, the 2 girls had fought with all they had, never wanting to fall behind. Naturally, the wounds they had sustained were not few. Although they were not fatal or crippled, to girls who were born with a penchant for beauty, even a single scar on their bodies was an unbearable agony. Now, they had to wash themselves to see if the scars would affect the beauty of their skin and if they could be removed completely. From head to toe, from arms to legs, from chest to back, Yu Rolan's sighs could be heard incessantly. There's a scar here on my shoulder. Sigh, it's quite deep. Even if it heals in the future, it'll still leave a scar. Sigh. There's another one here on the collarbone. I'm so mad, there should be 3 on the back, why is there 1 on the lower abdomen? I'm so mad. I'm so mad. There's 1 on my butt as well. There's 1 on my calf. Lingxi, Lingxi, I'm so mad. Look at the ones at the back, can they be removed? I'm so mad, Yu Rolan nagged, frantic and exasperated, no longer as calm and composed as she usually was. It seemed that beauty was indeed what women cared about the most, it was useless no matter how beautiful they usually were. However, she did not hear any movement from Ji Lingxi after nagging for a long time. She could not help but raise her head. You. Ah. Suddenly, she cried out, You. How did you? Ji Lingxi, who was standing opposite her, was also shocked. She was so shocked that she could not speak, completely dumbfounded. Arg, Yu Rolan stared at Ji Lingxi in front of her, almost going mad with jealousy. She sprung up from the basin and pressed Ji Lingxi into the water. You. I remember that you were injured more than me, much more. Why aren't there any scars on your body? Not even a little bit? I don't believe you. Let me take a closer look and check. Turn me over. Let me see. Ji Lingxi pressed her hand against her chest and said meekly, I don't know. I've really been hurt before. Arg. Yu Rolan cried out in jealousy. This was because Ji Lingxi's body was as smooth as a sheet. There was not even a scratch on her. Yes, even just a little bit. It was even more tender and smooth than a newborn baby's, perfect and flawless. It was as if she had never suffered any injuries since she was young. Not even a trace of martial arts practice could be found on her body. Yu Rulan's eyes almost popped out of their sockets as she searched carefully, her gaze filled with disbelief and disbelief. She remembered clearly that when Ji Lingxi was surrounded by the enemy with her, there were many times when she had seen Ji Lingxi injured with her own eyes, with blood splattering and wounds all over her body. When it came to killing the enemy, Ji Lingxi was more desperate than he was. Naturally, she had suffered more injuries than he had, much more. Just now, Yu Rulan was still thinking about how to console Ji Lingxi about not caring about the scar. Would it be better if she appeared more concerned about it? Who would have thought that she would be the one who was deeply agitated? No, she was the one who had suffered the most severe injury. There was not even a wound the size of a strand of hair on Ji Lingxi's body. Faced with such a cruel reality, Yu Rulan broke down. She was extremely doubtful of her own eyes. Could it be that he had seen wrongly back then? However, the arrow that day had clearly hit Lingxi's shoulder. He had fought the enemy with all his might, then pulled the arrow out and tended to Lingxi's wound. Although the wound was not fatal, it was a deep one. Ji Lingxi was fine, but he was already distressed by it. How could it be now? How could it be now? There was also the saber mark. The wound was clearly on Ji Lingxi's upper arm. Her arm had almost been chopped off. It was also the wound that she had bandaged. It could not be a serious injury. Where had the saber mark gone? That strike, what was going on now? What was going on? Don't wear it. Yu Rulan yelled when she saw Ji Lingxi standing up to put on her clothes. I want to check more carefully. I don't believe it, she looked and looked again and again, touching Ji Lingxi until her entire body was burning up, but there was not a single scar to be found. What the hell is going on? It's too mysterious. Yu Rulan sat in the basin in a daze, unconsciously looking at the scars on her body. Looking at Ji Lingxi's skin that was like a freshly peeled egg, she fell into a deep perplexity. I suddenly feel that this world is filled with deep malice towards me. Yu Rulan said in a tone that was bordering on despair. Ji Lingxi chuckled as she put on her clothes, blushing. Sister Lan had touched her all over like a female gangster just now. Ji Lingxi felt like she was going to give in. She bit her lip and said, I don't know what's going on either. The scars are gone anyway. I was worried. Sister Yu, what do you think is going on? Yu Rulan said in grief and indignation, how would I know what's going on? This shouldn't be. I saw so many scars, why are they gone now? Sister Lan, you seem to mind that I don't have any scars on me. Ji Lingxi pouted. Yu Rulan said angrily, of course I mind. We were hurt together. Look at how messy my body is while yours is smooth and smooth. How can I feel? Ji Lingxi rolled her eyes and said, actually, it's nothing. What's the big deal? I'll let you touch me more in the future, just treat it as your own. Yu Rulan was enraged. Ji Lingxi. Then, Ji Lingxi's giggling and pleading voice could be heard. Outside the tent. Yunyang rubbed his nose and turned to leave. He had wanted to come over to comfort the two ladies when he saw their condition, but he had come across such an erotic scene. Yunyang had only listened to them and he almost felt his blood boil. If he had rashly asked to see them just now, he would most likely have been beaten up by the two women who flew into a rage out of humiliation, right? Yunyang had wisely chosen to leave. However, Yunyang had the same doubts as Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan. He listened to Shengguan Lingxiu's words. Go and take a look at Lady Ji and Lady Yu. Both of them have suffered quite a lot of injuries, some of them are rather serious. I'm afraid they'll leave scars. That's something a girl can't accept the most. You. Shengguan Lingxiu said. Then Sister Lingxiu, don't you have any scars on you? Yunyang asked in concern, are they serious? Do you want me to take a look? Get out. Young Master Yunyang, the little lover, left with his tail between his legs. Then, he came here and coincidentally ran into the two ladies discussing scars. Therefore, young Master Yun did not even go in this time and left with his tail between his legs. Yun Yang believed that if he had gone in, the treatment he would receive would not be any better than what Shengguan Lingxiu had told him to get out. Perhaps, it would be many times worse. Chapter 525. Lingxi. Young Master Yun, you have to hold on tight. I think things aren't looking good. This Lady Shengguan is a great threat to you, a formidable foe, Yu Rulan whispered into Ji Lingxi's ear, wrapped in the blanket. How can I hold on tight to such a thing? Ji Lingxi was annoyed at the mention of it. That Yun Yang is a block of wood. He doesn't know how to flirt at all. He doesn't know, he doesn't understand. No, also, we have to look for Supreme Cloud quickly, to find out about your brother's whereabouts. Yu Rulan's eyes glinted with hope. Maybe, your brother isn't dead yet. He's one of the 9 Supremes, how could he die so easily? Yes, yes. Ji Lingxi nodded vigorously. If we can find him this time. Yu Rulan bit her lip and said, I won't go anywhere. I'll stay by his side. There's no need for any ceremony, wedding, anything. I won't think about family, anything. I'll just keep him company until the end. He wants to be one of the 9 Supremes, he wants to contribute to the country, I'll be by his side. When he's tired, I'll roam the world with him, roam the sea of consciousness. When he wants to settle down, I'll find a quiet place to live in seclusion with him, the man farming and the woman weaving. Yu Rulan's eyes were filled with longing. Ji Lingxi felt a pang in her heart as she hugged Yu Rulan and said sincerely, brother will definitely be fine. He has such a good sister-in-law waiting for him, how can anything happen to him? He'll definitely reunite with us. With you waiting for him, he won't dare to let anything happen to him. Yes, he'll definitely reunite with us. Yu Rulan's voice sounded like a prayer, like an affirmation, but there was also an endless sense of melancholy. Early in the morning, Yun Yang rode on ready, leading the way in the front. It felt more like he was running away, as if he wanted to get away from the group as soon as possible. It was a pity that he was caught by the latecomers before he could run more than 10 miles. Ji Lingxi and Yu Rulan stood in front of the horses with frosty expressions. What a coincidence! Yun Yang chuckled dryly and said, to be able to meet 2 beautiful ladies on such a chaotic journey, it is truly a blessing from the heavens. Yu Rulan's expression was icy. You're lying through your teeth. Weren't you the one who caused this bluish-black stain on our faces that can't be washed off? May I ask, where did young Master Yun's beauty come from? How can this be considered as God's blessing? Yun Yang chuckled and said, both of you ladies are beautiful, like deities. You're only slightly blemished, what's there to speak of? Besides, even if we don't look at their faces and only look at their silhouettes, their unparalleled elegance and beauty, how can a mere disguise hide them? What else do you have to say to flatter us? Go ahead and say it all at once. Don't stop. It's a long journey anyway, there's still tens of thousands of miles to go until we reach Tiantang City. We'll be in a good mood listening to your flattery along the way. We'll ask you again when we're tired of it. Work hard. Yun Yang shut his mouth, resentfully. I'm flattering you all and I still have to be interrogated by you all. Work hard? What do I have to work hard for? Interrogate me directly. I don't know anything anyway. I don't know anything at all. First of all, the thing on your face, it doesn't really matter, we're too lazy to ask you. It'll fall off on its own after a while anyway. There's no need to waste our interrogation time. Yu Rulan's gaze was like a cold lake in autumn as she stared at Yun Yang's face, scrutinizing his features. Yun Yang coughed and turned away instinctively, not daring to meet a certain someone's aggressive gaze. Turn around and look into my eyes. Don't avoid me, said Yu Rolan. Yunyang coughed and rubbed his nose, saying, Sister Lan, we're looking at each other. I'm embarrassed. Yu Rolan was amused and annoyed at the same time. She said loudly, even I'm embarrassed. What are you embarrassed about? Turn around quickly and look at me. Yunyang spread his arms and said directly, what do you all want to know? Just ask directly. If there's anything I can say, I'll definitely say it. Yu Rolan said, alright, where is Ji Lingfeng now? Yunyang was stunned. What? Yu Rolan said angrily, why are you pretending to be confused? Tell me where Ji Lingfeng is. Sister Yu, you're making things difficult for me. How would I know where Ji Lingfeng is? This is the first time I've heard of this name. If I were in Tiantang City now, I would at least have some influence and could look for help. I could spread out my men to search for him, but this journey back home is filled with strangers and strangers. What do you want me to say? How would I be able to find this person? How would I know where he is? As he said the last sentence, Yunyang felt an inexplicable twinge in his heart. Yes, I really want to know where eighth brother is now. I really don't know where he is. I really want to know where my brothers are. Yu Rolan snorted angrily. You're playing a rogue with me? You won't give up until you see your coffin, will you? Yunyang acted like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water, putting on a sincere expression as he said, as if he was bowing from the bottom of his heart, Sister Lan. I really don't know, Ji Lingxi said from the side, why are your eyeballs rolling around when you don't know? Not only does Sister Yu not believe you now, even I don't believe you anymore. Yunyang was taken aback. Huh? My eyeballs rolling around? They obviously did just now, answered Ji Lingxi. Yunyang stared at Ji Lingxi with widened eyes. Are they still rolling now? Not now. Why are you staring so wide? Are you trying to show off your big eyes? Asked Ji Lingxi. Yunyang asked, what about now? You saw my eyeballs rolling around just now. How did they roll? Ji Lingxi answered, something like this. As she spoke, she tried to demonstrate but she suddenly realized something and flew into a rage. Pfft! I'm trying to smooth things over for you, but you're using me as a distraction instead. Stop changing the topic. Hurry up and answer the question honestly. Yunyang said confidently, but my eyeballs didn't roll. They definitely didn't. They did. Ji Lingxi said angrily. They didn't. They did. They just rolled around. If I say they didn't, then they didn't. If I say they did, then they did. Your eyeballs must have rolled at least 7 to 8 times just now. Words alone are no proof. Show me the evidence. Ji Lingxi was stunned. Yunyang continued to argue, do you think I don't know what's going on with my eyeballs? On what basis do you say that my eyeballs rolled around? Show me the evidence. People who speak irresponsibly and scoundrelly also need evidence. Ji Lingxi almost fainted, her lips quivering as she said, your eyeballs, they were clearly moving, they were just like that. Yu Rolan rolled her eyes at the sky. Sister, we're forcing him to answer questions. All right. Why did your brain follow his train of thought with just one sentence from him? Why are you so calculative about whether your eyeballs rolled around or not? Is this the time to be calculative about that? Let's just say that you didn't, all right? Sister Ling saw wrongly just now, all right? Answer my question quickly. Yu Rolan tried to smooth things over quickly. However, a glance at Ji Lingxi's trembling body rendered her speechless. That won't do. What do you mean by, let's just say it? What do you mean by, all right? Yunyang was relentless. You're accusing me so wrongly. You want to settle things with just one sentence? There's no such thing in this world. I didn't even roll my eyes just now. Rulon was speechless. You were behaving like that just now. We're already like this, and now you're behaving like this. What do you want? You're King relentless. Do you want to go to heaven? I'm being serious. I'm asking you, Ji Lingfeng, I'm being serious. My eyeballs didn't roll around. I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. I'm asking you, I didn't roll around. I'm an honest man. You're all scoundrels, honest men. Beat him up. Ji Lingxi could not take it anymore. She pounced forward, punching and kicking as she threw everything she had at Yunyang. Rulon's pretty face was flushed with anger as she charged forward as well. She understood now that she would not be able to get anything out of Yunyang if she continued to argue with him. It was better to just fight. However, with Yunyang's current cultivation base, it was a piece of cake for him to deal with the two girls. He did not even need to fight. His protective mystical chi alone was enough to send the girls staggering. Clang! Rulon held her sword in her hand, gleaming with a chilling light. Use weapons. Both of you can't beat me even with weapons. Yunyang was smug, but his expression suddenly changed as he said in terror, You, what are you doing? Don't be rash. It was Rulon who held her sword horizontally. She did not attack Yunyang but placed it against her own neck. Her eyes were filled with determination as she looked at Yunyang. I know we're not enough for you to fight, but if you try to dodge or retaliate, I'll cut my own throat on the spot. Do you think I wouldn't dare? Yunyang was speechless. Chapter 526. What kind of explanation was this? Was this another variant of using death as a threat? What a terrifying attack, so sharp that I have nothing to say. Yes. Ji Lingxi was an intelligent person as well, coming to a realization at once. With a clang, she drew her sword and said, Well said, sister you. If you dare dodge, I'll kill myself. I'll sever my meridians. I'll bang my head against the wall and die in front of you. The corners of Yunyang's lips twitched. And now there was someone who could infer other things from one instance. If you're so capable, why don't you ascend to the heavens? In spite of this, Yunyang dared not make a move. He dared not resist or even dodge. These two ladies before him were eighth brother's younger sister and eighth brother's fiancée. What if they really committed suicide in front of him? Yunyang shuddered. All right. Ask whatever you want. I'll tell you what I know, but I can't do anything about what I don't know. It's useless even if I threaten you with my life. Yunyang looked crestfallen. Rulon's eyes glinted with amusement. You know my question. Perhaps only you know it in this world. Yunyang thought about it and said, I do know a little about it, but I can't say it here. Why? Rulon asked. Yunyang lowered his voice and said, Sister Yu, it's only the war that has stopped now, but we can still be monitored and controlled by people with ulterior motives at every moment, and those people with ulterior motives also want to know the answers to the questions you want to know. So it's best that we don't mention it. We'll talk about it when we reach the capital. Yunyang's expression was unprecedentedly serious. Rulon and Ji Lingxi believed him at once, instinctively believing him at the same time. Yes, the 9 Supremes had just appeared and defeated Dongxuan's army. The people who targeted them that day must have made a move. It was only natural that they, who were related to them, would be under surveillance. After all, the 9 Supremes' enemies were the pinnacle existences of Tianxian continent. They were even more dangerous than Lei Dongtian. Their actions today were really thoughtless, to actually interrogate him so forcefully at a time like this. Luckily, Yun-yang did not give in. What if it was too close? The two ladies nodded repeatedly, regret and apologies written all over their faces. Yun-yang heaved a secret sigh of relief, knowing that he had passed another hurdle. It was obviously Yun-yang's excuse to say that he was being watched. There was no lack of such a possibility, but at least, Yun-yang had not sensed anything unusual up until now. If there was someone with ulterior motives, the information that Yulingxi had revealed just now was already too much for them to make a move on the spot. The most important reason for Yun-yang to say so was that he had yet to think of how to say it. If he told them the truth, he believed that the two women would definitely not be able to accept it. But what should he say, what should he do, and what should he do? Yun-yang's mind was a mess. He could not make up his mind no matter how much he thought about it. There was still a long way to go to Tiantang City. With this buffer time, perhaps it would be enough for him to think of an excuse and how to deal with it. Yun-yang sighed inwardly. The road ahead was long and full of obstacles. Brothers, how many unexplainable questions have you all left me, but I don't dare to offend anyone, how unlucky. Right after Yun-yang left the Fortress of Resilience, the Western troop that had come as reinforcements officially bade farewell to Fu Baogua and returned to the western border. At this moment, every man in the Western troop was carrying at least one bundle on his back, piled high on his back. Some of them were even carrying more than 10 bundles on their backs. The whole troop was like this, and it was a sight to behold. Of course, there were also soldiers who did not carry parcels. They were all injured and their injuries were not light, making it difficult for them to move. They were placed on the hundreds of carriages that had been temporarily conscripted. However, even the injured lying on the carriages still carried a few parcels in their arms. These parcels were filled with the remains of their comrades, their brothers, and their comrades. They didn't want to put their brothers' corpses on the cold carriages. They would rather carry them on their backs all the way back to bring their comrades back. They were all living people, just like him, alive and well. Sun Zihu looked at the troop behind him, his rugged face already wet with tears. The chilly wind continued to howl. Sun Zihu stood on his horse and turned his head to look back. The return journey had begun, but he was reluctant to leave for a long time. 150,000 Western elite troops had come as reinforcements. Now that the war had ended, they were finally going back. However, only 30,000 of the 150,000 brothers who had come as reinforcements could go back with him. No, to be more specific, it should be 29,653 people. It was not even 30,000. More than 120,000 Western warriors had been buried in front of the Fortress of Resilience. How do I explain this to the brothers who are waiting in the Western troop? Sun Zihu cried. How do I explain this to the marshal? 120,000 brothers, how do I explain this to their families? You have fought for the country and sacrificed your lives here. It is the blood of men, but those of us who have survived are infinitely more miserable. Brothers, our souls have returned, we have returned home, brothers, it's time to go home. The 30,000 Western men screamed at the top of their lungs. Their cries were heart-wrenching, their sorrowful voices echoing above the battlefield. The clouds in the sky were low, the winds howling. It was as if the 120,000 heroic souls were gathering and lining up in a military formation, preparing to follow their brothers home. The bleak sound of the horn echoed on the snowfield for a long time. The 30,000 soldiers of the Western Army were all silent. Along the way, aside from the sound of footsteps, horses' hooves, the occasional neighing of healthy horses, and the fluttering of flags, no one else said a single word. Only the formation remained orderly. The footsteps were still majestic and high-spirited, as if the brothers who had gone to eternal rest were still in the formation, making the long journey home with him. They were still by his side, never abandoning him. He seemed to be able to hear their breathing and smell the strong stench of sweat on their bodies. It was a smell that he had been most reluctant to smell in the past. They were the same as him. All of them were silent, silently moving forward, using their own footsteps to create a heroic melody. Behind him, in front of the faraway fortress of resilience, Fu Baogua led the remnants of the eastern troop and lined up neatly. "Salute! Send the Western brothers off!" Fu Baogua hollered as the entire eastern troop raised their hands in unison. Every soldier at the eastern front stared at the silhouettes of the Western Front army as they walked away. Their hands that were raised to salute were never lowered. As the Western troop walked, they gradually moved further away. Suddenly, someone in the formation began to sob softly. This sorrowful atmosphere quickly spread throughout the entire army. In less than 100 breaths of time, the Western army was filled with sobbing and choking sounds. Sun Zihu continued to advance in silence, as if he didn't ask anything, but in reality, his chest simply felt as if it would explode at any moment. He panted heavily, and after forcefully suppressing it for a moment, he couldn't hold it in any longer. He suddenly roared, "What are you crying for? Are you all king women? Our brothers died fighting for our country, they died a worthy death. They are all heroes. All heroes. Do you know what heroes are? Why are you all crying? We should be proud. We have such good brothers, we." Towards the end, Sun Zihu's roaring voice suddenly stopped, as if he had been forcefully torn apart. He abruptly rolled off his horse, sprawled on the ground, and wailed bitterly. He no longer had any image to speak of, he clutched at his chest and felt his heart shatter into pieces. The pain pierced his heart and lungs. "It's fine if we die together, but there are so many casualties. How are we going to explain this to the marshal when we return? Explaining to the marshal is secondary, how are we going to face our own hearts?" Sun Zihu's tears streamed down his face. No matter what, they still had to walk on this path. They had to go back eventually. When the commander-in-chief heard that the situation on his side was not going well, he sent a messenger eagle to inform them that he had sold all his assets and gathered all the money of the entire army. Together with the silver he had earned from his assets, the money would be distributed equally to the families of the deceased brothers in the name of all the officers and soldiers of the Western Army after the country compensated them. This was in line with Sun Zihu's understanding of his marshal, but at the same time, he also knew that the marshal's estimation of the war was not going well and the loss of manpower was greatly off. He had asked in a serious tone in his letter, "Are there still 110 to 30,000 brothers who can fight now? What are the casualties? Why was there no report?" Sun Zihu did not reply to the inquiry in the letter because he really did not know how to reply. If the marshal knew that less than 30,000 of the elites of the Western troop he had brought with him could follow him back in the end. Such a tragic war, such a cruel reality. How would the marshal feel at that moment? If he vented his anger on Sun Zihu, that would be fine. Whether he reprimanded him or beat him up, Sun Zihu would have no complaints even if he killed him. What he was afraid of was that the commander, who had a fiery temper and loved his soldiers like his own children, would vomit blood on the spot and faint. Sun Zihu's eyes were streaming with tears, his heart was weeping blood. It was better to send his brothers back first before anything else. When they entered the territory of Yutong's border, the towns and cities along the way gradually increased and became denser. Whether it was Yunyang and the Western troop, when they passed by, there were countless people waiting at the entrance of each town or city, even if they did not take the same route. There were the elderly, children, women, and the young among the people waiting. They had prepared delicious dishes and boiled hot water. When they saw the army coming from afar, they went forward spontaneously to deliver food, drinks, and clothes to the soldiers. They had given them the best consolation they could at the moment. There were also people who looked worried as they asked carefully, "Sir, do you know how Yutong's Eastern Troop's 3rd Troop is doing?" "My third son is there, there's no news until now. I know I shouldn't ask about this. One should be fearless when fighting for the country, but I just want to keep this in mind. General, do you know about the 4th Troop of the Steel Cavalry? My husband is a centurion in the Iron Cavalry. Right now, he's... Although no news is good news, we still need some concrete news. Only then can we be at ease, isn't it? You. A beautiful young married woman with a protruding belly nervously asked. General, do you know Lu Sanhu? A young girl with a delicate and pretty face was flushed as she rubbed her braid. I'm his fiancée. His parents are old, and they can't walk properly. I will be thick-skinned and ask if he's doing well. I've promised him that I'll get married when I come back. The girl was as pretty as a flower, her cheeks flushed and her eyes watery. She was bashful, but she asked bravely. Her gaze was filled with longing, it was longing for married life. Yunyang felt like his chest had been hammered. Sir, do you know, General, do you know, countless people approached cautiously, their faces ingratiating but their eyes were filled with apprehension. Their questions were so humble. Even their voices were trembling when they asked. They were eager to know the answer, but there was fear flickering in their eyes. While they were eager to hear news of their loved ones, they were also afraid of hearing bad news. Yunyang and the rest were silent, not knowing how to answer. Yunyang and the rest were silent, not knowing how to answer. Countless veterans who were carrying parcels on their backs tried their best to hide the parcels, hunching their backs as they hid them in their arms. We've won. Dongxian has been defeated and has retreated. The news of your families will come soon. They're all good men who protected their homes and country. We've won. Dongxian has been defeated, they've retreated. News of your families will come soon. They're all good men who protect their homes and country. Marquis Yun pacified them. There are too many people participating in the Eastern defense this time. We are truly sorry that we can't recognize all of them, my fellow countrymen, please don't be impatient. Heaven helps the worthy, I believe that your loved ones will return safely. When Marquis Yun said these words, he wished he could slap himself hard on his own face. How hypocritical he was to say such words that went against his own conscience. Being an emperor, being approachable and winning over people's hearts was a compulsory course for the royal children. Marquis Yun was no exception. However, now that he had uttered these words that were originally at his fingertips, it was so king heart-wrenching. It turned out that being approachable was actually not a compliment. It was clearly the biggest fake head. Dongxian had participated in this battle with almost 3 million men while Yutong had deployed more than 1 million men. When the battle ended, Dongxian was left with less than 400,000 men. It was almost a tenth of their number. On Yutong's side, there were less than 200,000 survivors, including the Eastern and Western troops and the martial world's reinforcements. In other words, after this series of battles, there were 4 million men from both sides, and only 600,000 were left alive. The remaining 3,400,000 were all gone. Who could guarantee that someone was still alive with such a horrifying ratio of casualties? At this moment, the so-called comfort was perhaps the greater devastation before they received the bad news. What could be more unbearable than the despair after receiving hope? Out of 10 households, at least 7 or 8 of these villagers who had participated in the war, what awaited them in the end would only be sorrow and despair. Thinking of this, the villagers could not swallow the fragrant dishes that the villagers had sent to them. They felt like something was stuck in their throats. Despite the strong sincerity before them, they could not swallow it. Even their own hearts were torn apart by the pain. Facing those expectant gazes and listening to those careful and perturbed questions, everyone felt that they were already hard-hearted enough to not burst into tears on the spot, all the way back. What they faced along the way was the same scene. Their hearts were torn apart again and again, over and over again. The army was already far away. However, the people who were waiting at the entrance of the village were still waiting there. They looked at the road in the distance in a daze, hoping that in the next moment, their sons, their brothers, their husbands, would gallop over, covered in dust, and announce to them, "I'm back." They were waiting, today, 4,500, not even 2 chapters. Chapter 527. The news of the Eastern Front's victory had been relayed back to the capital city. His Majesty was overjoyed when he heard the news. He had long predicted that the Eastern Front would not fare well and had even thought of personally leading the army to support the Eastern Front. However, old Marshal Qiu had already taken most of the elites in Tiantang City, including the royal guards. Even if he were to lead the army personally, there was no one else he could use. In addition, the timing of the 4 countries' attack was too sudden. Even if there were reinforcements in Tiantang City, it would be beyond their reach. Unexpectedly, the final report from the Eastern Front was a complete victory. Even Dongxuan's marshal, Han Sanhe, had died on the spot. This result was a long sigh of relief for Yutong's emperor. However, he was silent for a long time after asking about the casualties on his side. It had only been a short war of 2 to 3 months, but millions of warriors had died in the battle. Even if he was the ruler of Yutong, the emperor who held the entire world in his hands, he could still feel the throbbing pain. The pain was excruciating. Millions of warriors. His Majesty heaved a long sigh, tears welling up in his eyes. All the warriors who perished in the battlefield were loyal warriors who protected the country. On the day of victory, I shall welcome them 100 miles out of the city. I shall welcome these warriors personally. I wonder how old Xiu is doing now. Inform the Board of War and the Board of Revenue to reward the meritorious officials handsomely. As for the warriors who perished in the battle, give them the highest standard of pension. I shall be personally involved in all matters related to this war. Inform the Board of Appointments that they shall not be stingy in rewarding the meritorious warriors. Inform the Board of Rights to welcome the meritorious warriors back to the imperial court with the highest scale. It must be done quickly. I shall host this welcome personally. Announce this great news to the world. Order the Ministry of Justice to launch a nationwide crackdown, focusing on the bullies and hooligans who run amok in the villages. Those who bully the families of the fallen soldiers will be punished 3 times more severely. There will be no leniency and no pardon. His Majesty was a military man who had come from the military. He knew very well what the warriors needed the most. He knew what he wanted the most, what the soldiers were most worried about, and what the dead heroes missed the most. Therefore, his first reaction after receiving the news was to start from the most practical direction. The last order to convey the Ministry of Justice's decree was personally written by the emperor and stamped with the imperial seal. He also stamped his own personal seal under the imperial seal. This was a unique exception in the process of drafting imperial edicts. This seemingly unceremonious action clearly revealed His Majesty's attitude towards this matter. He wanted to use his actions to show that he wanted all the officials in the world to know that he wasn't just talking about this matter, but was personally supervising it. Anyone who dared to abuse the law for personal gain would not only face punishment from their superiors, but also the wrath of His Majesty. If you want to act rashly, come at me. Who would dare to bear the wrath of the emperor? Once the emperor was enraged, corpses would float for 1,000 miles. From today onwards, build a heroic spirit shrine. From today onwards, the Hall of Meritorious Service shall be rebuilt. From today onwards, the national liquidation will begin. His Majesty's series of orders almost drove the eunuch to death. His Majesty's tone was especially harsh when he said the last 4 words, national liquidation. No one in the world was optimistic about Yutong's chances in this 4-nation siege, be it in the imperial court or the commoners. Compared to the commoners and martial artists who were eager to join the war and face the national crisis together, many tycoons, businessmen, and wealthy families were making their own calculations. There were even many who were waiting for the opportunity to use their connections to contact the dignitaries of other countries. If the Dongxian army were to invade Yutong, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was also because of this that these people and forces turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to Yutong's official donations and the military's predicament. There were also many officials who began to plan for their own escape route when they saw the dire situation. If Yutong were to be destroyed, where would they go? There were questions like these. Before the war, when Yutong's forces looked like they were in a precarious situation, His Majesty had not been too forceful towards the fence-sitters. Firstly, he was afraid that it would incite a revolt among the people, both internally and externally. Secondly, even His Majesty thought that it was understandable for them to seek a way out under such circumstances. Although he was furious, annoyed, and eager to kill them, these people had yet to do anything that would truly bring disaster to the nation and its people. If Yutong were to be destroyed, then let those who had already found a way out go. Why must they be exterminated? They were his people after all, it was better to leave them a way out. However, the situation now was completely different. His Majesty was exceptionally clear about one thing: Yutong's eastern front had defeated Dongxian, the four-nation siege had been completely broken, and even the continent's top god of war, Han Sanhe, had been killed. Did it not mean that Yutong would unify Tianxian and become the once-in-a-lifetime hegemon? It was no longer a joke. It was already here. This opportunity was about to be grasped in his hands. There was no need to be merciful to those who were disloyal and unjust to the nation. Mercy would only leave a hidden threat, a scourge. Therefore, His Majesty began to punish them heavily. How did the saying go again? One must first pacify the internal affairs before dealing with external affairs. His Majesty wanted to ensure that Yutong was a complete piece of iron when he sent out his troops to conquer the world. Therefore, these unstable factors had to be eliminated early, or at least, they had to be pushed out. If these people were to be left alive, their current channels could very well become channels for leaking military intelligence when the war broke out in the future. Perhaps it would be easier for spies from other nations to break through. An emperor who did not keep secrets would lose his official, an official who did not keep secrets would lose his life, one who did not keep secrets would cause harm. It was necessary to take precautions. On the way back, Yunyang had executed His Majesty's edict that had yet to be conveyed thoroughly. He was even more thorough than what the edict had said, turning into 3 gods of slaughter together with Fang Mafei and Bai Shue. Yunyang had even instigated his cheapskate father. Every time the 4 experts, including Marquis Yun, arrived at a place, they would send out their spies to scout out all the local ruffians and gangsters within a 1,000-mile radius. They would then follow the map and kill them. Who were Yunyang and the other 3 experts? For Heaven Realm cultivators, they represented the highest achievement of Yutong's cultivators. The targets they targeted would only have death awaiting them. There was no chance of survival. The bullies who usually ran amok in the villages and preyed on the people could not even wait to be punished by the nation's law, their heads had already rolled to the ground. 90% of these people's family assets had been plundered. With Yunyang and the others' status, they really should not have resorted to such barbaric, unreasonable, bloody, and cruel methods. In spite of this, Yunyang had made up his mind to continue the massacre. He knew that these people were the root of Yutong's cancer that needed to be eradicated. These people were tyrannical and unscrupulous to their own people, but they were servile and spineless to the outside world. This was the classic example of bullying the weak and fearing the strong. After this war, there would be many more lonely old people, orphans, and widows in the country. They would lose their protection after this war because they had lost the pillars of their families. Perhaps, for a certain period of time, no one would dare make a move against them because of their heroic aura. However, after a period of time, these people would definitely be reduced to the lowest rung of society. They would be bullied and humiliated without any ability to fight back. Humans had always been the most forgetful and forgetful animals. Everything was over once a person was dead. These 5 words were never just for show. Therefore, Yun Yang was willing to lower himself to be an executioner, the kind of executioner who was merciless and merciless. Chapter 528. As Yun Yang's targets were too broad, even Marquis Yun felt his hands going soft from the killing. However, Yun Yang still collected information with a steely expression and urged the few of them to go out to kill and plunder every night. Isn't it a little too extreme? Not everyone with a bad record has to be killed, right? Marquis Yun grew increasingly uneasy and tried to persuade Yun Yang more than once. A dog can't change its spots. Even if we know that some people can change, what if they don't and cause trouble in the future? I'm not willing to bet on what if. Because we might not notice or encounter these things in the future. It's better to nip it in the bud. Although we bear this bad reputation today and bear many sins, we can let millions of orphans and widows who died in the war live in peace for at least 8 to 10 years. With this buffer time, it'll be enough for the children to grow up and become the new pillar of the family. Yun Yang said faintly, even if I can't bear to do it, even if it's too harsh, even if many of the targets don't deserve death, it's better to kill them all. At least, it can put the souls of those who died in the war at ease. That's enough. That's why I kill without any psychological burden. There's another reason. Yutong has been at war for years and the treasury is empty. After this war, I'm afraid the treasury won't even be able to fork out enough compensation, let alone more rewards. Yun Yang said, we'll kill and plunder along the way. When we return to the capital, we'll be able to contribute at least hundreds of millions of silver taels to the treasury. With this additional sum of money, we'll be able to solve the treasury's urgent need. Marquis Yun chuckled dryly. It's not just urgent. We've only walked less than 3,000 miles, but the silver taels we've plundered have already reached as high as 70 million silver taels. The further we go, the wealthier the targets we target will be. Not to mention the places near the capital, there will be hundreds of millions of them. We won't be able to stop them at all. It's better if we can't stop them, the more the better. Yun Yang said faintly, Marquis Yun, I don't know if you've seen it, but usually in a village, the family of such a bully is usually much, much wealthier than the average family. How much of it is the blood and sweat of the people? I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It is precisely because these people are hated and feared by everyone that it is easy for them to do anything, almost without any scruples. That's why they amassed so much wealth in such a short period of time. These years, morals have been deteriorating day by day, people are no longer what they used to be. There's a saying going around in many places. Yun Yang was silent for a moment before he said, murder and arson have gold belts, repairing bridges and paving roads leaves no corpses. Hearing this, Marquis Yun could not help falling silent. That was because he had heard these two phrases not just once, but countless times in his travels. What kind of resentment and helplessness must there be to spread these two phrases among the people? Yun Yang said coldly, accumulating virtue and doing good are actually not as good as bandits and tyrants. Repairing bridges and paving roads is nothing compared to arson and murder. The appearance of this phenomenon in itself is a kind of moral decay of the entire country. And the people we've killed are only the first of these two sentences. Yun Yang said, our bloody massacre this time is indeed using violence against violence, but it will also tell the people that good will be rewarded with good and evil with evil. It's not that retribution hasn't come, it's that the time hasn't come. We'll let the people know that there are still benefits to accumulating virtue and doing good, repairing bridges and paving roads. Although God can't see it, there are still those in power or heroes who can. This is the main reason why I've persevered in my massacre this time. I'll use blood and slaughter to tell our people that God has eyes. In the distant imperial court, there's another pair of eyes watching over this world. There will never be a situation where the emperor is far away. Yunyang lifted his gaze and looked at Marquis Yun. So, not only do we have to shoulder this sin, we have to shoulder it more and continue to shoulder it. Marquis Yun's emotions turned to agitation as he panted heavily and said in a low voice, "That's right. That's right. We have to shoulder it. More of it. God may forgive us, but we won't." He looked at Yunyang with unusual relief and said ruefully, "Yunyang, tell me, if you were really my son, how great would that be?" Yunyang pursed his lips and said, "Forget it. You don't even have a wife now. Isn't it too much to worry about your son?" Marquis Yun was exasperated. Could he not be so harsh with his words? However, Marquis Yun, who no longer bore any psychological burden, had a swift change in attitude. He was initially hesitant, but now he was ruthless and merciless as he went on a killing spree. What Yunyang could not stand the most was that Marquis Yun had turned into a miser. "How much did you rob today?" Marquis Yun asked Bai Yishue. "Where's the silver? Where is it? Give it to me. All of it." "What about you? Where did you rob it? Give it to me. All of it. And you?" Marquis Yun looked at Yunyang. "The houses in the direction you're heading to are the richest. Take it out quickly, don't pocket it, understand?" Yunyang, Bai Yishue, and Fang Mafei were speechless. Do you know that our plan of robbing the rich to give to the poor has already collected 65 million silver taels? Marquis Yun looked excited. Even when the national treasury was at its most abundant, there wasn't so much money. It's really a lot of money. Yunyang was speechless. Robbing the rich to give to the poor? Robbing the rich is true, but does your so-called giving to the poor really work? Who are you giving to? All the money is still in your pocket, not a single cent less. Are you that poor? Marquis Yun's current state is indeed very poor, a very talkative one. Marquis Yun was showing a side of him that no one knew about, calculating his debts. We're still 3,700 miles away from Tiantang City. Let's work harder and try to work overtime within these 3,700 miles. Our target is 100 million silver taels. You must accomplish this goal. Even if you don't sleep, rest, you must achieve it. It doesn't matter if we kill a few more people. These people should have been killed a long time ago anyway. We must be careful when we kill them and confiscate their possessions. Don't miss out on any treasures." Yunyang felt ill all of a sudden. "What we're doing is for the benefit of the nation and its people, all right? Why does it sound like we've all become thieves all of a sudden? Thieves with strict discipline at that?" Hearing Marquis Yun's declaration, the group's enthusiasm, especially the sense of achievement of serving the nation and its people, was immediately reduced by half. It was rather dull now. When you're arranging the search list, why don't you expand the scope of the operation to 2,000 miles? Marquis Yun said excitedly, "Only 1,000 miles is too small. We'll have to put in a little more effort, but the benefits are obvious. Lots and lots of money. Oh my God, where did the previous Marquis Yun go? Help!" Yunyang felt like he was trapped in a cocoon of his own making. He was digging his own grave. He couldn't bear the consequences of his own actions. When the time comes, throw this money in front of His Majesty. He'll die of joy. Marquis Yun guffawed. "What if he asks you where the money came from? Will you tell him that you've killed tens of thousands of people along the way for this money?" Yunyang asked. "He'll definitely punish you." "Punish me? Would he dare to punish me? Marquis Yun pursed his lips. We're born from the same root. He's the emperor while your father is wandering the martial world and suffering. I've only seen my biological father once in my lifetime and he was *king indifferent. Until now, I'm still doing my best for him and my identity can't even be exposed. Would he dare to punish me? If he dares to punish me, I'll swap places with him. I've spoiled him so much that he dares to punish me. Doesn't he know who your father is? Marquis Yun was furious. Yun Yang was speechless. Who can tell me where the elegant and carefree Marquis beyond the heavens, dressed in green, has gone? You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.